This is Humans of Tech, episode 001 with Dillan Leslie-Rowe and me,
Hello.
Chris Morrows. So I wanted to give everyone some context as to what this podcast is all about, because it's something that we've been thinking about for quite a long time. The idea behind Humans of Tech and Humans of Creative, which is the other side of the podcast and what we're going to be doing, is to tell the human story behind some of the most interesting leaders from around the world in the technology industry and the software industry. And we listen to podcasts a lot ourselves, and we've noticed that the actual human story behind some of these leaders in the tech industry is very rarely something that you actually are given access to. You very often will hear about leaders in tech and give, I suppose, a rundown of their career history and where they work or the company that they've started, if they're a founder and or CTO, and it's very work related. We want this podcast to be human related and to go into the actual human story behind how these individuals got to where they are, some of the really open and honest, hard-hitting, raw, very powerful, sometimes tragic stories of how they actually came to the position that they're in at the moment. And we wanted it to be a storytelling venture, if you like, to go into the background to a lot of these human stories. So I don't think that I would be comfortable asking the future guests of this podcast to come on and talk very openly and honestly about their life stories if I hadn't already done the same. And the way that we're going to approach this first episode is that normally I would be the host, if you like, and I would be asking questions of the guests, but we're flipping the tables here, and my main man and business partner Dillan Leslie-Rowe is going to be the one
I will be doing the grilling.
Yeah, he'll be doing the grilling and asking me the questions, and I'm going to give you all a real open, honest insight into my story, my human story, and everything, where I grew up, my family, and everything like that. And I'll be honest with you all, I'm nervous about going through the details, and a little bit anxious. And I've been anxious all day thinking about having to talk about this, but it just feels right that we have some skin in the game, if you like, in sharing my story first and foremost. That my story is something that I've never really openly talked about. Dillan doesn't know the majority of it, so I'm sure he's looking forward to getting under the skin.
I mean, we've been friends for 12 years or so, and we know quite a lot about each other, I suppose. And we've obviously been talking about how we're going to go about doing this podcast and what we're going to talk about. And we both kind of looked at our lives and thought, I mean, there's some great things that have happened in our lives, but also some quite dark things and stuff we've never really spoken about. And I think I've heard snippets of your life, Chris, I think over the last kind of 12 years and what you've kind of been through and everything that you've kind of, I don't know, how you approach life. And it's going to be really interesting to dig a bit deeper.
Yeah.
And see exactly how you got through to where you are now, I suppose.
And that's the whole point behind it. It's telling those stories so that, essentially that the real life story can bring some value to whoever's listening, and hopefully provide some context as to who I am and what I'm all about, really. But like I said, I'm nervous and anxious. Excuse me, I'm nervous and anxious about telling the story, because it's only really like I could probably count in one hand the amount of people who know everything about me. So the thought of bearing all and putting it all out there is been something that it's been making me nervous for the last couple of days when I've been thinking about it. It's only really my dad, my brothers, and my wife to be who is heard. But even so, she's probably not heard a lot of it either. So it'll be interesting for her to listen back to this as well, I'm sure. So
should we kick things off just with a kind of quick summary about your current situation in life and where you are?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's...
And then we can track back right to the beginning and see where you came from.
Where it all began, yeah. So my name's Chris Morrow. At the current day, I am the managing director and founder of a company called Digitalent. We're a technology and creative recruitment agency based in the UK and in Australia. I've been a recruiter for going on 16 years now. Spent a lot of time living in the UK and in Australia. At home, I'm engaged to a beautiful fiance called Jez, and we have 3 beautiful daughters, Rosie, who's 5 years old, and twins Darcy and Millie, who are 16 months currently and running us ragged at the moment at home.
Overridden by women.
Yeah, that's it. And not in the way that I imagined when I was younger. I thought it'd be more like Hugh Hefner, but obviously not to be. So that's my kind of current state of play, and I suppose a little bit about who I am right this second. But I'll go back and talk you through the sort of the beginning of it all, if you want.
As everyone can probably hear, I mean, you're a Scotsman. I hope you can understand what Chris is saying. His accent isn't as strong as it used to be. It's calmed down.
You're going to confess now that you've never understood anything that I've ever said to you.
I just nod.
You just nod, yeah. Say yes to everything, yeah.
So tell us about a wee town called Glasgow, where it all began.
Yeah. So, as you can tell, I'm from Scotland, more specifically from Glasgow. All of my family are Glaswegian. I was born in 1982, in August, 19th of August, 1982. In a hospital which is sadly now demolished. That's how old I am.
Really?
Yeah, there's nothing of it left, unfortunately. A place called Rotten Row Maternity Hospital in Glasgow.
What a name!
Yeah, Rotten Row, and my my mum, whose name was Joan, and my dad Hugh. They met in... So I'm from the East End of Glasgow, very proud East End of Glasgow, sort of where I grew up, and it's known. Baillieston, yeah. Baillieston.
Is that right?
Baillieston, yeah. Always get confused if ever I was out, like in a pub when I was a lot older, and people would, Glaswegian people, or even when I was in Sydney, people would say, "Oh, you're from Bearsden," and I'd say, "No, Baillieston." Baillieston's a really nice, well off, middle class,
wrong end of town,
very well to do area of Glasgow, and people always, get that one wrong and say, "Oh, you're from Bearsden," and no, and I'll correct them and say, "No, I'm from Baillieston," and they'll go, "Oh, right," and then shuffle away. But yeah, the East End of Glasgow is known for being a working class area. It's people are the salt of the earth and very down to earth, friendly people, and I'm very proud that I'm from there. But it's definitely our family was definitely a sort of working class, low income family. My dad met, for instance, my mum when I think it was in about 1972. I have asked one of my brothers about this, because obviously it was before my time, and he thinks it's around about 1972 in a pub called the Marquis Pub in a place called Shettleston. Yeah. So you have where my beloved football team Celtic, their stadium is in a place called Parkhead, and then you go a little bit further out from the city centre, probably about a mile, and you get to Shettleston, and then about another mile on from Shettleston is Baillieston, where I grew up. And my dad met my mum in a pub called the Marquis Pub, which is still there, and I think used to drive past it a lot when I still lived in Glasgow. It was 1972, and she was working as a part-time barmaid at the time, and my dad was working at a place called United Glass in Parkhead. So my dad's a retired mechanical fitter. He's always worked in factories. He's always used his hands. Always used to come home from work like smelling of like engine grease and like oil and like all that sort of interesting stuff. And he he's always worked with machinery and sort of fixed broken factory machines, basically. So at the time, when he met my mum, he was working at a place called United Glass, and I think he must have nipped in there after work or something like that, and saw my mum.
Did he ever tell you what the chat-up line was? Do you know what his moves were back in the day?
No, he would never divulge such secrets. It's not something I've ever talked to him about, to be honest. I mean, I'll ask him more about it, but but to give you the context of that, so my mum at the time was, she was a single mum. She had been married previously to a chap called Billy, and his they had a son called Colin, and Colin's my oldest brother, if you like. So I've got 3 brothers in total, all older than me, and my dad had also been married at the time, and he had 2 boys, Kevin and Stefan, to his first wife, and they split up when I think Kevin was 3 years old. This is at the time when my mum and dad had met. Kevin was 3 years old, and I think Stefan was a year old, and Colin would have been a year older than Kevin at the time, so he was 4.
So how much older is Colin to you?
Colin's 13 years older than me.
13, yeah.
So my mum and dad met in 1972, and I never came along until 10 years later. Yeah. So I was definitely a surprise. Slash mistake.
Surprise it
was. So my mum was a single mum at the time, and she was living in Baillieston in a place, a street called Crown Street, which was right across. Our house was right across the road from St Francis of Assisi church, chapel, and literally right across the road from the car park. And it was a council house, so we didn't own the house or anything like that. It was very much, like I said, a very low income working class street. All the neighbours knew each other. Sort of like, I think my mum had lived there since about 1969, so she'd been there for probably about 3 years by the time she met my dad. Colin was born in 1969. He won't thank me for saying that. And yeah, and yeah, like, to give you an idea of what that place was like, it was, like I said, it was a working class neighbourhood. The kids all played in each other's gardens. I doubt very much if people were like locked their doors and stuff like that. It was a kind of cul-de-sac as well, with a church at the end of the street, so it wasn't a lot of thoroughfare, like people driving through, and like everyone knew who everyone was. So it felt like a kind of safe neighbourhood to grow up in.
That's kind of what it was like back in the day, wasn't it? I mean, it's similar in my childhood in London.
Yeah.
Another city, you could just go out. Your mum and dad just let you run the streets. We used to play in the parks at such a young age, and there was kind of no worry then, and everyone was that kind of community feel.
Yeah. I mean, sometimes I hear, you think it's rose-tinted glasses, and you sort of say it couldn't have been that good, but it genuinely was a safe environment, and people, like looking out for each other, and and all the rest of it. So that was like my early time and early memories. And Crown Street and Baillieston were like, playing football in the street. I played football like, every second that I could when I was growing up. Colin lived with us. Colin had lived in that house before my dad met mum, and obviously when I came along, it was only a 2-bedroom, like it was like a gable end of a terraced house. So we were right at the very end. It was a very small house, and
so Colin was 13 then when you came along.
Yeah, Colin was 13.
And obviously you're throwing them into a house together.
Yeah.
Have you ever spoken to Colin about this and how he kind of felt at the time?
Yeah, I mean, he was dead excited. Yeah, he was just mega excited to be getting a little brother, really, and he was old enough to, he would always look after me. And I've got my probably the only video that I have of round about then was my first birthday party, and I could see Colin's in the background in his sort of school uniform. He's like literally kind of like been at high school like a year, which is the same high school I ended up going to, which I'm sure we'll talk about. But yeah, he was just very excited to be getting a little brother. Kevin and Stefan, when they used to come and visit Dad, are obviously similar ages to himself. So he was super excited, and most of my early memories were happy in the fact that I was just like playing with my brother. And he actually, because there was nowhere else to sleep and the house was so small, like I said, because we didn't have any money, Colin used to sleep in the cupboard.
Really?
He used to have a single bed and like a single mattress. He built a shelf inside what's basically like an airing cupboard type thing, and he put a shelf in there, and it would have like a little door. But it's that I distinctly remember him having a bed, and he had like a little shelf with like a TV up above it type thing. But it was a cupboard. There's no getting away from it. Like it was a cupboard, and I had the actual room, with the bed. There was physically nowhere else to.
Yeah. This is a cupboard coming off your room.
Yeah, it's in the room. It's to the side of the room basically. So we used to sleep in the same room, but I would sleep in the bed and he would sleep in the cupboard. Always just to remember that.
So how many years did that go on for?
So, that was, I mean, we lived in that house like my mum, my dad, Colin and me until I was 7 years old. So the whole time yeah, from he was 13 till about 20, he slept in that cupboard the whole time. So it was pretty crazy when you think about it, you know. So
yeah.
So I used to play football with my brother in the street, and I just remember, like, you know, things like, I mean, some of my earliest memories, things like, you know, the ice cream van playing in the street. Used to come to, there was a little square at the bottom of the street, and used to play the music, and used to always go out and get like penny sweets and all of that sort of stuff. But most of my childhood, early childhood, was spent playing football or going over to the pitches, which were part of the primary school by the house called St Francis of Assisi. And in the East End of Glasgow, we didn't have at the time like grass pitches or all weather pitches. It was red ash. So that was the original like all weather pitch, which is like, it's just like gravel basically, you know, like just like,
take your knees out of your slide tackle.
Oh, big time, yeah. But that's where that's where I sort of learned to play. You know, to play football was over in those pitches, and I used to, I started primary school in 1987, which was a primary school called Caledonia Primary School, and I always remember my mum always shouting at me to say, "Don't go to," when she used to put me to bed, she used to say, "Don't go to bed in your school uniform," and she used to always come up and do like kind of spot checks, and I used to always say, no, I won't. And then I'd wait for her to go downstairs and wait for a bit, so in case she did come up and do a spot check, she'd think I was asleep. And then I used to dive out of bed and put my school uniform on and jump back into bed. And because I knew that in the morning it would give me an extra like 5 minutes playing football before I would get like called in for my breakfast. That's how obsessed with football I was. Basically. So, but I mean, it wasn't all rosy though. Like at home during that time, it was like I said, it was a close knit community, but there were obvious problems between my mum and dad. Mainly caused.
Was this a thing that had kind of grown over the years? From the are we talking around you're 7-8 years old here, or whereabouts are we?
Yeah, so. I mean, just all, like I said, some of my earliest memories, I don't know, it's probably like maybe I was about 4 or 5, was actually, sadly, of my mum and dad arguing. They used to argue a lot, and I used to remember being upstairs and hearing, you know, from my bedroom, hearing the two of them arguing a lot, really quite loud, and you know, and not violently in terms of like physically violent, but definitely verbally like abusive towards each other. And I remember that a lot. To be honest, it was tough.
Or even thinking back at it now,
I just remember being confused by it, and but also almost thinking that it was not normal, because I'd always been subjected to it. So a lot of it was, I mean, my mum was like the life and soul of the party. She was a kind and she's a fantastic mum in the sense that she was her life was our kids, and she was a really good mother. But she had her demons for sure. She had a self-destruct button for sure, and she liked to drink, and she was an alcoholic really, and she had been an alcoholic for some time. When I say an alcoholic, I mean a bottle of vodka a day type alcoholic, and that.
How old were you when you kind of realized that, or even acknowledged that was a thing? I mean, did you know at the time, or is it now you're looking back and thinking, right?
I mean, when I was super young, I didn't really understand what it was or what was happening. But I do remember my dad used to work. I mean, my dad, I get a lot of my kind of like work ethic, if you like, from my dad. My dad's a grafter. And all grown up, even when I was like that young, you know, when I was like 2, 3, 4, 5, even before I'd gone to primary school, my dad used to work back shift, what we would call back shift, which would be like a 4 p.m. till 4 a.m. shift, and then he would sleep during the day and get up. And, you know, we didn't see him a lot when he was doing those types of shifts. And I think mum was drinking all the way through that period. And that had kind of come from, like, she'd worked as a barmaid, and she used to, I remember my auntie, my mum was one of five sisters. And her eldest sister got a job in the bars to work alongside her, just so she could keep an eye on her, basically, because she was a, you know, bit of a party animal, and she would drink away all of her tips, and she would just sort of, like, you know, work and then get drunk afterwards. And I think that's where the kind of alcoholism really started for her. She loved a party and a good time, but she would just never know when to turn it off. And I've definitely got a bit of that in me for sure. I've definitely got the self-destruct.
I can see your personalities from your dad, and I can also see the personalities from your mum. It's actually quite funny to hear.
Yeah, and that's where it kind of comes from. As you know, my dad's a very, very quiet guy, and he wouldn't, you know, he could spend time in someone's company for hours, not say a word, and it's like I suppose the epitome of confidence in a way, that you don't feel like you have to, you know, sort of like fill up every second with nonsense words. You could just sort of sit there. That's kind of my dad. But my mum was very much a sort of life and soul, and a little bit promiscuous and everything like that. And I think that's where a lot of the, you know, the arguments came from. Mum would probably be drinking a lot at home. You know, I think there was some partying involved. I'm sure that, you know, I'm sure there was other men involved. I would be quite surprised if that wasn't one of the main reasons why they didn't split up in the end. And yeah, but I think the one to answer your question about the drinking, I remember once when I was probably about 4 years old, and there had been some sort of party going on, or, you know, at the house, or maybe mum had some friends over or something like that, potentially when my dad was doing one of his back shifts. And I remember going into the toilet at the time, and I took a big swig of what I thought was water, and it was just a full glass of vodka. Really? And I remember being violently sick when I was probably about maybe 4 or 5 years old, because just this burning, you know, obviously you just gulp it, not even smelling it or anything, because you didn't know what it was. And I remember just being like, whoa. And I just remember the place just being an absolute riot, because there's been a party there, like, you know, the night before and stuff. So that was quite a common occurrence where my mum was involved. My dad was always a lot, like I said, a grafter, and a lot more sensible when it comes to that. More of an ale drinker, and not so much a party until all the wee hours, especially not at home anyway.
This all led then, I suppose, to the divorce of your parents.
Yeah, that's right.
At what age, where were you, and how were you feeling at the time?
So up until that point, I suppose I was relatively unaware of, like, any of the bad things that were happening, and I suppose my life was on, I'd probably say, quite a happy childhood, apart from obviously being subjected to some, you know, the arguments and everything like that. And I think that I could tell at the time that the arguments were becoming more frequent and more animated and louder and everything. I didn't really know what to make of it at the time. And then when I was 7 years old, my world really got turned upside down when my parents sat me down and told me that they were getting a divorce. And like I said, that was down to mum that happened. Like I said, I think her alcoholism had reached a point that was becoming a problem. And when my dad was at work, she was drinking heavily and not being faithful. I think so that's the reason why it happened. But I remember my world completely crashing down when I was 7 years old, and I found out that Mum and Dad were having this thing called a divorce, and we weren't going to live all together anymore. And I just remember feeling like my heart had been ripped out, and it was like an awful low feeling in my stomach. The thought of your family being torn apart, and it was the worst thing at the time that had ever happened to me. I remember that when all of this was all happening, that my dad's friend sat me down and he actually asked me who I wanted to live with. Do you want to live with your mum or do you want to live with your dad?
God, I can't even imagine having that decision to make at such an age.
I was 7 years old, and I remember sitting there for a minute and just could not get the concept into my head. And my answer, how would you be able to choose between you? It's basically, choose between your mum and your dad. And the only thing I could say to him was that I want to live with both of them. I want us all to be together, and obviously that wasn't going to happen. So the actual choice was then taken away from me. And
you were actually able to make that choice. Then would that have been a legal stand if you said, "Look, I want to live with my mum or my dad"?
I think it might have held some weight in court if they said, "Oh, the child wants to be with." I think what the reason for asking me that, I understand, as harsh as it was to, I suppose, establish if I had a preference for living with dad because mum's drinking, or I wanted to live with mum over dad for some reason or whatever. And it's just an impossible, it's an awful question to ask a 7-year-old. But I suppose slightly necessary in a way before you go down the road of dragging everything through the courts and all the rest of it. And that's essentially what happened. They were involved in a really bitter custody battle at the time. And
how did that come about? Was that your dad not wanting your mum to see you, or vice versa? Or
no, it's so what happens when parents are going through a custody battle and getting a divorce, if they can't agree on shared custody, then it ultimately has to be decided by a judge in the family courts. And what at the time, in the context of it all, dad was filing for divorce, and he was moving out and wanted to take me with him. He wanted to protect me from mum's alcoholism. He didn't want me to be around like a mum who was drinking a bottle of vodka a day, and she was very destructive with it, and all the rest of it, because obviously it's not good for the child. It wasn't good for me, and everything that came around the periphery in terms of the parties and other men and things like that. Obviously he wanted me out of it, but mum would never agree to it. She wanted us to be together, and like I said, when she wasn't drinking, when she was like sober, mum was the best person in the world. Like I said, very loving and caring, and the perfect mum in many ways, but she had that other side to her, and that was the deciding factor in them getting divorced. So it got really nasty because various family members were sort of pulled into the discussion based on the fact that my welfare was at stake. Yeah. So, for instance, my auntie Ellen, who's my mum's oldest sister, ended up testifying against her.
Really?
Because she knew it was the right thing to do from my welfare perspective, and that's something that my mum really never forgave her for after that, and it put their relationship for many years after that under an unbearable amount of strain. because she stood up and testified against my mum, and said that, you know, that I was better off from a welfare perspective to live with my dad. My brother Colin, he also stood up and testified against mum, which must have been a tremendously difficult thing to do, to testify against your own mother. But it's something I'll always be thankful for him for doing, because I know that looking back, it was the right thing to do, and that must have been an unbelievably difficult thing to do. And on the day that it was decided that my dad would have custody of me, what the judge essentially decided that my mum would get custody from Friday at 6 p.m. until Sunday at 6 p.m. And the rest of the time I would live with dad. And I remember being at primary school, and my mum came straight from the court to the primary school, and took me out of class and just stood crying, holding me, because she knew that she'd lost me. I couldn't get any words out of her. I didn't know what really was going on, and I just remember standing sobbing uncontrollably, and all the class were looking and the teachers were looking, and no one really knew what to do. She was pretty much on the floor in hysterics, crying, because she knew that she'd lost her baby boy as a result of all the drinking. And I always remember that being I mean, I was crying as well because I didn't know what was going on, and I just remember it being such an awful feeling, because that's not something that I was happy with, that my family was being ripped apart, and I was having to, I wasn't going to see my mum until Friday at 6 p.m. It's a really tough thing to try and comprehend at seven years old, and I was only really a baby myself.
So how did that all work going forward after that? What was the dynamics?
So what used to happen was, my dad and Colin, because my mum didn't want anything to do with Colin after all of that had happened in the courts, Colin came and lived with my dad and me. So we moved probably about a mile and a half away.
You're still close.
And Baillieston, to another council house on a street called Oldwood Road, which is this time was across from Bannerman High School, which is the high school that I ended up going to. And we moved in there, and by this time Colin's obviously a young man. He's like 20 years old, going into his 20s. He's going out clubbing and drinking and working and stuff like that. And so I would see him less and less, because he's sort of got other things going on. He's no longer a high school student. He's a sort of young man. And what used to happen is all the way through me being at primary school, I used to run from primary school back to my mum's house every lunchtime. I used to sprint there and sprint back, just so that I could spend some time with her. And she used to always make me a ham salad sandwich with salad cream. That was every single day, and I used to love it. But things didn't get any easier with mum, because mum ended up going back with getting back with Colin's dad at the time. And I think Colin's dad was one of the men that I mentioned that she'd probably been seeing behind my dad's back. She went back with him, but he was a very physically abusive alcoholic. So I thought my mum was bad with her drinking. That he was the kind of guy that would drink vodka and that Carlsberg Super and cider. I remember seeing him once getting a litre bottle of vodka, 2 bottles of cider, Carlsberg Super, and put it all into one massive jug and stir it round and basically down the whole lot. And what he used to do is he used to get so drunk that he'd start drinking in the morning, and as in breakfast time type thing. And he used to drink until he would basically fall unconscious, and then he'd go to sleep for a few hours. And when he got up from being asleep, he used to start hitting my mum, badly. Hospitalised her a couple of times, knocked me out a couple of times. So when I used to go to visit my mum, part of it was because I really wanted to see her, but also part of it was because I wanted to check if she was all right, because she always kept that house in Crown Street. He lived in a place called Hamilton, so she used to drive between there. And when I used to go round at lunchtime, sometimes she'd answer the door and she'd have like a black eye or like a burst lip. And obviously I was too young to do anything there, but and it used to really upset me because, my mum's found herself in this situation where she's now got an abusive partner, and that was the main reason why she left Billy in the first place. I think the reason why she went back to him is because she was all of a sudden lonely, and when you couple that with the alcoholism, it's a slippery slope. I'm not condoning anything that she'd done, far from it, but I do think that she was quite lonely when she was going through all of that sort of stuff, and she just accepted it.
She's lost her 2 kids ultimately.
Yeah,
and she's probably gone back to Colin's dad to have that kind of connection to you guys in a way.
Yeah,
whether that was the right thing to do or not.
Absolutely,
she put herself in a life that's toxic to her and what she didn't need at all.
This guy, he was like a piece of work, he was like a classic mold of a wife-beating husband. And she just became so conditioned to it, and it was normalised. That, I mean, it used to get to, for many years after my mum passed away, which I'm sure obviously we're going to talk about. I used to get butterflies in my stomach at 5:30 on a Friday. Every Friday, even when after she'd been dead for several years, I used to still get that. My body was conditioned into that fight or flight, like anxiety at that time, because I never knew when my dad dropped me off what I was going into. I never knew if they were sober and everything was going to be okay for like a day or two, or if I was walking into a complete Wild West scenario where they'd been drinking all day and all the rest of it. And I never used to tell my dad what all the stuff that used to go on, because I was so scared. I was so scared that he wasn't going to let me see my mum.
Yeah.
And you probably wouldn't have, because of all the, I mean, some of the stories just, they used to, like I said, I remember, just loads and loads of stuff, like, he used to obviously drink a lot, and he used to be, physically abusive, but I always used to try and get my mum out of there. So if we were in his house and they would be drinking, my dad had maybe dropped me off there, because that's where my mum was going to be. They would drink until they were like kind of like unconscious and stuff. And when he went to bed, I would try and always bundle my mum into her car. This is how desperate it was.
Yeah.
To try and get her away from the situation. So I remember times when I was maybe 9 years old, and my mum was so scared that he was going to get up and beat her up again from one of his sort of drunken stupors, that we would put all of our stuff into like a duffel bag, and I'd get her into the car, and she would work the pedals and I would steer, and we would go on the motorway, and she's drunk out of her mind and she can't see straight. She's done like a bottle of vodka, and I'd be driving on a motorway. She's working the pedals, and I'm literally like sweating as a 9-year-old driving a car, because I need to get my mum somewhere safe, because I'm scared that he wakes up like he did it a few times. He's going to put her in hospital. It was that kind of scenario. So every Friday at 5:30, my body used to just kick in with like the whole fight or flight adrenaline thing, because I just never knew what I was getting into.
Yeah.
And it was
unbelievable.
It was a really messed up situation, and something that a child should never really be subjected to. But that was from when I was 7 years old until when Mum passed away when I was 12. But I mean, in between then, there's so many things that happened in terms of like, there was cries for help from Mum. So I remember one instance where my brother Colin had come round, and my mum, I don't know where Billy was at the time. He must have been drunk himself, unconscious or something like that. But I remember my mum telling me and Colin that she'd downed a load of pills, and that she was falling asleep. Then there was like a bottle of empty pills next to her and stuff, and they were really, I can't remember what pills they were, but it freaked Colin off, freaked him out enough to put my mum in the car, and we rushed all the way to the hospital. My mum's fallen unconscious in the back seat, and my job was to try and keep her awake all the way to the hospital, because I was afraid that if she fell asleep, she was going to die. And I remember that whole journey in the car, which was probably about 15, 20 miles in the car, and I'm in the background, there's screaming happening and trying to keep my mum awake because she's down this bottle of pills. And remember getting to the hospital, and they pumped her stomach to get the pills out, and there was no pills there. She just made up the whole story because it was a kind of cry for help. And I just, things like that would happen regularly, and you just like every single weekend there'd be something like that.
You've obviously touched on a couple of times that your mum passed away. Do you want to tell us the story, the lead up to that, and how it all went about?
Yeah. So,
talk about.
So I started Bannerman High School in, I think it was August in 1994. So I had literally just turned 12 at the time, born in August 1982. Mum died on the 7th of March 1995, which was around about 7 months after I started at high school. And she was age 49, I think, at the time, so incredibly young. And
very young, yeah.
I remember I had gone, I think it was a Tuesday from memory. The last time I saw Mum, we had gone to a car boot. We used to go to car boot sales a lot on a Sunday. She was like an avid car boot sale goer and bargain hunter, basically. So that was the last time I remember seeing her, and I left her in Billy's house on a Sunday at 6:00 as normal, and it got to the Tuesday, and obviously this is before the time of like mobile phones and stuff, so I wouldn't hear from my mum from the Sunday until the following Friday. And I had gone down after school to play with a friend of mine, a guy called Alan Prentice, and we were playing football in his street, which is a place, it's kind of between my house and his house. You've got to cross over a railway line, and there's a bit what used to be fields. It's all houses now, fields and stuff like that. And normally I would walk home in the evening, but for some reason, which was quite unusual actually, I decided to call my dad and ask him to come and get me and pick me up. And normally my dad would be like, if you asked him something like that, he would give you an earful down the phone, or like at least grumble a little bit and huff and puff and utter a few swear words or something like that, but he would always do it. So I said to Alan that night, I'm going to call my dad and get him to come and get me, because I didn't fancy like walking up. It was a big, dark, windy road. It was a little bit dodgy, tight thing for a young lad, through fields and all of that sort of stuff. So I remember calling up my dad and asking him to come and get me, and he was absolutely nice as pie on the phone, to the point where it completely freaked me out. He was like, "Yes, son, no problem. I'll come and get you. I'll be 5 minutes, pal. No problem." He was like, "Oh." It did not sound like my dad. And I remember hanging up the phone, and I looked at Alan and I said, "Something's wrong. Something's like seriously wrong." And he just laughed it off, and he thought I was just sort of like making a big deal out of it. And I said, "No, something's not right. My dad never acts like that." And Alan was like, "I'm sure it'll be nothing." And my dad came and picked me up, and where Alan lived, it was in a place called Broomhouse, and you come out of his street at the end of the street, and then it's like a T-junction, and you go left to go to up those windy roads through past the fields over the railway line to where our house was. My dad came to the end of the T-junction, and instead of turning left to go home, he turned right and didn't say anything. And I sort of turned round to him and said, where are we going? And I just remember seeing my dad's face, because he didn't know what to say. And he sort of, he sort of blurted out, Your mum's in the hospital. We're going to the hospital." And my first question to him was, "Is she all right?" And he never said anything. And then I remember asking him, I said, "Is she dead?" And he just nodded. And I completely lost the plot. Like, violently, I started punching the dashboard, screaming. And I just didn't know what was happening in that moment. I totally lost control. And obviously crying uncontrollably. And at that point, didn't know what had happened. And we drove to the hospital. It was a hospital called Herr Myers, which is a place called East Kilbride, which was the closest hospital to where Billy had lived at the time. And we got there, and my brother Colin was already there, and my aunties were all there, and Billy was there, and you could tell that he'd been drinking. And yeah, I never really got the full story as to what really happened to her, if I'm honest. She was found at the bottom of the stairs, and she died officially from something called pulmonary edema, which is water in the lungs, which could be caused naturally, or it could have been caused by, her being fallen unconscious and swallowing her own vomit or whatever type thing. Yeah. But I've always thought at the time, even in the lead up to it, I thought that Billy would have had something to do with it. If anything ever happened to my mum, I thought it would have been something to do with him hitting her, and how violent he was towards her. But there's no way that I could ever, kind of prove it. He's told the police at the time that he wasn't in the house, and he had gone to the shops and came back and just found her like that.
Like that.
Yeah, and that was that basically. So yeah, it was still is the hardest day of my life. To, when you find that out, and like I said, at that age,
you reach a point like that in your life. It's like, right, how do I deal with this? How do I manage it? How do I process this? How do I continue forward? And I suppose for you, how did that make you think? I mean, did that change? It must have changed something inside you.
Instantly changed me. Instantly changed me. I mean, I can only say this now with hindsight, decades of hindsight. I grew up instantly at that moment. I was my childhood was gone. That was it. You know, you can't really go back to playing innocent games with your friends in the street and not thinking about that every single moment. I remember being, for the first few days that it happened, being in shock, complete shock, and it hadn't sunk in. And I remember playing football with a friend in the street outside my house, and I was stopping people that I'd gone to school with and say, "Hey, do you hear my mum's dead?" And they would look at me and be like, "What?" You know, "Oh my God, like what?" And I would just be sort of not laughing it off, but it never registered with me. And it wasn't probably until maybe a week or so later, I'd played football, and one of the first things that I would always do when I had a really good game of football, if I'd played well, is I'd want to phone my mum and tell her, because she was one of my biggest fans when it came to football, and used to come and watch me and stuff whenever she could, and she'd always push me to play. And obviously my dad as well. My dad is, taking me everywhere, all over the country, to play football growing up and everything. But I remember playing football. I had a really good game one day, and I rushed through the door, and because I wanted to call my mum, and I put my bag down from football, and I dialed a number. And I remember it getting to the last digit, and the realization of the fact that you'll never talk to your mum again. She's gone forever. You'll never hear her voice again. And it hit me like an absolute steam train. I just fell on the floor. And I remember my dad having to carry me up to bed, and I just stayed in my bed crying for probably about 2 weeks. Inconsolable, to the point where, I used to be freaking out, and I used to scream at the top of my lungs. I thought, if my mum can see me, please talk to me. I just wanted to talk to her. If she turned into a ghost or something, and I just needed to speak to her. And I used to shout, and nothing would come back. This is when my dad had gone to work and stuff. And I was just completely inconsolable.
I couldn't imagine kind of going through that. As a kid and growing up through my life, there was no real losses in the family, and we weren't affected at all in any way like that. As you'll know, my mum died 3 years ago from cancer. So I feel like at that point, obviously a lot later on in my life, that changed me. That changed exactly how I thought. It changed what I cared about, what meant more to me than other things. And you do change as a completely different person. Yeah. And that 3 years ago, I was 33, 34. And I can't imagine how much that would actually affect you at such a young age. I don't know how you'd actually process that.
Well, at the time, after that moment where I broke down and I was in bed, and I remember we had a big group of friends, big group of lads that I used to kick around with, that I'd known from primary school. We'd gone to high school together, and there was probably maybe about 20, 25 lads who I was always considered to be close friends of mine, and only 4 or 5 of them at the time plucked up the courage to come round and see how I was doing. And
people don't know what to say, do they?
People don't know what to say at all. I actually remember this is why, one of the main reasons why I've never really properly talked about this, is that I remember at the time, after the first sort of couple of weeks, and after I'd broken down and just spent all that time in my bedroom, I remember seeing, I can't even remember who it was. There was 2 or 3 people that I'd gone to school with, and I saw them cross the street so that they didn't have to speak to me. And I remember them shuffling away because they didn't, and it always really confused me. But I just didn't realize at the time.
Did you want to talk about it? Did you want to be able to?
No, but I didn't want them to avoid me because of what had happened. Yeah. So I just pushed it under the carpet a lot. I never really talked about it to anybody about my mum passing away. And as you know, it's not really a conversation starter, is it? It's not like, what do you say to someone when someone hasn't lost a parent? They genuinely don't know what to say. What do you say to someone who's lost a mum? And ultimately I didn't want people to treat me any differently, to be honest. So I just used to not talk about it. So a lot of the people that I went to school with, probably weren't aware, apart from my friends, weren't aware at the time what had probably happened, other than that I was off school and all the rest of it. I'm sure it went round the year, but it was never something that was kind of talked about. But to go back to your point, and it's the most valid point, is that how do you go over something like that? I don't think you do get over it as such. I heard a really great analogy for like a proper grief. I think I might have shared it with you on another podcast, and the analogy was around waves. So when something like that happens to you, the wave of grief knocks you completely off your feet, and it's so unbelievably powerful at the start that it bowls you over and it makes you lose it. And the time in between the next wave is really, really short. So you might have like a couple of minutes, and then you get bowled over again, and that turns into like a couple of hours, and you get bowled over again. And then the only thing that happens is that over time, the power of those waves becomes slightly less, and they stop happening a couple of minutes between each other. They go to days sometimes, and they go to weeks after that, and then months after that. And my mum's been gone now 25 years, and I still have a cry about it, and I think about her 100 times a day, every single day. But one of the biggest things that made me realise at the time was that when it was happening was that as a 12-year-old boy, I realised that I was going to die. Because when it happens to your parent, you suddenly think, this is going to happen to me.
Yeah.
It's going to happen to my dad. It's going to happen to everybody. And all of the choices that you make and the lens that you look through at the world from that moment is the world's a very different place, because you realise that we're not here for a very long time. My mum, I remember throwing a handful of dirt onto, I was the first person to do it, onto my mum's coffin, and I remember that image of looking down onto the plaque that was on the top of her coffin, and I remember seeing her date of birth and when she died and her age, and thinking, we're really not here for a very long time. And that's what I meant by the fact that I grew up instantly when it happened. Literally after that, I just thought differently about everything.
I mean, you're a young kid in Glasgow. I mean, there's two directions you could have taken. You could have gone down to the corner shop, got into drugs with your mates, just gone down the wrong path, or kind of getting your head on a swizzle and just going forward.
At the time, I felt in the area that we were living in, with it being it's a working class area, there was temptation all around. If I wanted to go down that road, it was right there. I only had to reach out and grab it, type thing. And it could have been hard drugs. It could have been alcohol from 12, 13 years old, easily. And in a lot of ways, I felt people's eyes on me almost expecting that. They were like, right, I could feel it. They were kind of writing me off to think, oh, his mum just died, like he's going to go off the rails, just watch. And I could feel that subconsciously. And I remember thinking, nah, fuck that. There's no way. And I remember very distinctly understanding at 12 years old that there was a choice to make here. You can either, given what's happened to you, your mum's passed away, you've just started high school, you can either use that as an excuse and go completely west get into drink and drugs and probably get arrested, and your life goes down that path. And it was like a fork in the road that you're standing there, and it's very clearly signposted. Use it as an excuse, turn left, or use it as fuel, turn right. And I very distinctly remember thinking, I'm going to use this as fuel and motivation to try and make something in my life. And then from that moment on, I just put my head down at school. I tried to never ever get in trouble. I tried to play. I stopped playing football for probably a year because of what had happened, and fell out of love with it a little bit. But I tried to always, play football, and I tried to make my mum proud, really, more than anything. And when it got to like 15 and 16 and people were drinking down the park, as they do in Glasgow, not a lot of things happening for young kids that age in the East End of Glasgow. So, kids go down the park and drink and all that stuff. I used to still go down the park with my mates, but I never used to drink because I would always be afraid of disappointing my dad. Because if I had come home drunk, it would have been expected of me because of all the stuff that I'd been through. So it was kind of almost cliche in a way. Also, he wouldn't have been angry with me. And my dad was, growing up from 7 years old when it was me and him, and obviously Colin living at the house, and Colin was away out working. And like I said, at that age and stuff, my dad was my best friend. He was a dad, but he was also my best friend. He would be the one who would be playing with me, and I'd confide in. I'd spend all my time outside of school with him because mum wasn't there, and we developed a very strong bond that exists even to this day. And I would just I'd never have wanted to go home stinking of alcohol on a Friday night, and for him to just be like so gutted. He would be genuinely gutted.
Yeah.
So I used to be there, and people used to take the mick about me not drinking and stuff, but used to kind of pass it off that I was obviously playing football and stuff at the time, and I would never really miss out on anything. Like, I'd always be there with my friends, but they would all be rolling about getting drunk, and I never did. And then, like I said, I just kept my head down at school. And then, I think when I was probably about 14 years old, my dad started I'm sure he'd been dating for a while, as a lady called Sadie, and he used to park up outside the front of the house at the end of the dates and stuff like that. And it was the happiest but I've seen my dad for years and years and years, really carefree, and loved seeing him like that because I hadn't seen him properly happy for such a long time. And I remember going out.
How did that introduce her?
Well, I remember going out he never formally introduced me, to be honest. I remember going out with like a cup of tea to the car one time because they used to sit out there for hours. And I think I remember inviting her in and saying, "Why are you sitting out here? Don't you just come in the house?" I remember them both being really surprised and stuff like that. And then after a while, Sadie moved in with us, and they ended up getting married and all the rest of it. What's that?
They're still together now. Yeah,
they're still married now, but because of the close relationship that I've had with my dad, and the type of personality that Sadie is, we've never really had a relationship properly because of that, because we've been so close to my dad. And I think she saw it almost as a threat. Really. So
did she then move in to your house?
So she moved into Old Wood Road at that time. And since then, from like 14 until I left to go to university, 4 weeks after my 18th birthday. We had a really difficult relationship, basically because, like I said, I suppose, baggage that came with my dad more than anything, really. So we've always had a very difficult / non-existent relationship with each other, basically. So, but yeah.
And I suppose that's the case.
What's that?
Is that still the case?
That's still the case. Yeah, we don't really talk that much. I mean, there's been things that have happened over the years which I don't want to go into, too much and stuff. But yeah, it just all boils down to the fact that she it's.
Did your relationship with your dad change?
Not really. I mean, we were always like super close. Nothing really affected us in that sense. I was just really, really happy at how happy he was, and I, even though things were difficult at home, all of a sudden for me, with Sadie moving in, I was really over the moon for my dad. So the way that I was looking at the whole situation was that it was worth it because my dad was so happy, because the two of them together, me aside, the two of them together were very good with each other and made each other happy, and there was lots of laughter and caring and and everything like that. But I was treated very differently in the house, really, by Sadie. And in the end, I tried to stick in at school as much as I could, and my ultimate aim was to try and not only get away from the house by going to university, but I wanted to get away from Glasgow. I wanted a bit of a fresh start. I couldn't.
18 years old.
Yeah, I couldn't imagine going to Glasgow and sort of like still living at home, which is what a lot of people in my high school at the time were doing. They were sort of like commuting in. They were going to commute into like Glasgow Uni or Strathclyde Uni or Glasgow Caledonian Uni. There's a couple of unis obviously in Glasgow, and a lot of people were going to be doing that. And at the time, I don't know why, but I was interested in doing I was trying to impress my dad, basically, because my dad's always worked with his hands and he's been like an engineer. And I thought I wanted to do engineering at university. And at the time, I didn't want to do mechanical engineering, which is what everyone basically wanted to do. So I thought I'm going to do something a little bit different. So I ended up picking a course, which I've got no idea why someone didn't just stop me and be like, what are you doing here? The course was naval architecture and marine engineering, which is basically, like ship design and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And there's only 5 places at the time in the UK that did naval architecture as a degree course. There was two of them were in Glasgow. One was in Newcastle, one was in Southampton, and the other one was King's College in London. So Southampton was just going to be too far away for me. I'd never been that far south, like right on the south coast. King's College London was going to be too expensive to live in as a working class lad from a working class family. The two in Glasgow were too close to home, and the only one that was kind of left was Newcastle. So I decided I wanted to go to Newcastle, basically. And like I said, it was 4 weeks after my 18th birthday that
had you actually been to Newcastle before and seen the city? Or
I think it's a good question. I think I'd been for maybe an open day with my dad.
Yeah.
I think.
I mean, you picked a good one. What a city to be in.
What a city to be in. Total fluke. Yeah. And I remember I remember my dad dropping me off with all my stuff, and one of the most important things that happened, which was really weird to think about it when you look back on it, was when my dad dropped me off at halls of residence. I went to the halls of residence that I lived in. Wasn't the main happening halls of residence, which was more expensive. Basically, a place called Richardson Road, and there's another place called Castle Leazy's. I chose a place called St Mary's College, which was in Fenham, which is like out of the city centre, and very quiet and like all of that sort of stuff. And I only did that because it was the cheapest halls of residence, and that's all that I could kind of afford.
Yeah.
And when my dad dropped me off in Newcastle, I remember being in line to pick up the key from the office. And there was a big line of people who were waiting to pick up their keys, all like new students and stuff. And there was a big notice board on the left-hand side of the wall. My dad's standing next to me, and I'm stood here. And there's like this notice board is probably about 6 foot by 6 foot wide. It's a big, huge notice board, and there's hundreds of notices on there and post-it notes and things that had been like stuck on and like different colours and all the rest of it. And I saw this poster saying, "Think you're good enough? ? Come and try out for the uni football team. This is the address and stuff." And I was looking at this poster, and I turned around to my dad, and I looked at his eyes, and he was looking at the exact same one.
Yeah.
And I remember him looking at me and just sort of nodding, saying, "Get yourself in there," type thing. Yeah. And I remember thinking, I'm going to do that. And when my dad dropped us off, and he was sort of like leaving to drive back up to Scotland. He didn't stay the night or anything. It was just drop me off that day. I remember him saying to me, it was like a really poignant moment, because my dad's a very quiet guy, believe it or not. He's not as talkative, like outgoing as myself. I think I mentioned it earlier. And he's never been like an emotional cuddle giver of a dad type thing. I think he's only, we've only had a few warm embraces, my whole life type thing. He's just a sort of typical Glaswegian dad of that age type thing. Yeah. And I remember giving me a big bear hug. He's a big, strong guy. And I remember him saying to me something that I'll very often think about now. He just said, "Now remember, enjoy yourself, but just remember, sleep is the key." And I always remember at the time thinking, what a bloody weird thing to say, what sleep's the key? And sure enough, like a couple of days later, I knew exactly what he meant, because obviously Freshers Week going on, and like drinking all the time and all the rest of it. And I just thought my dad was so right. And it's just, there's little bits of sage wisdom from dad with stuff like that. So it got to maybe a couple of days later, and I'd arrived at Newcastle without any football boots, and I'd played to a decent standard up until then up in Scotland. And I was going to go to this football trial and stuff, because I thought it'd be brilliant to play for the uni football team if I could get in, but I'm sure it was going to be pretty hectic and trying to get in and very competitive and stuff. And I remember going to there's a student sort of like there was a gym on one of the days at university, and there was tables set up for different clubs, like fencing club and the rowing club and like all of that sort of stuff. And then there was a uni football team, and I remember I put my name down on the sheet on the last day that this thing was available and stuff. I think I was like one of the last people in, because I remember people they were packing up at the time, I'm sure. And I remember putting my name down and getting the details of where I need to be and all the rest of it. And it was like a bit of a bus journey from where I was. It was the opposite end of the city to get to where the trials were. And it was going to be like literally 3 buses to try and get there and stuff like that. And I remember on the day of the trial, I think the trial was at about 2:00, and it got to like 1:00. And it was a good like 45 minute, an hour away or whatever. And I talked myself out of going, because I just thought, I won't get in and there'll be too many people there and I don't have my boots. I was making up all these excuses, and I remember the guy that I'd only met, a friend of mine called Jimmy, Jimmy Allen, and he absolutely diamond of a guy from Leeds. He was in my halls of residence, and he actually talked me into going to the trial. He just said, just go into town, grab a pair of football boots and get yourself to the trial. And he got through to me, and I grabbed all my stuff when he eventually made sense, and he talked me into it. And I rushed into town and grabbed a pair of football boots, like the cheapest football boots that I could find, got myself to the trial. And there was something like 160 lads that tried out for 3 spaces in the football team. And luckily I was one of the guys who got in.
Amazing. For 3 spaces?
3 spaces, yeah. Because there was only so many lads who were leaving. Graduating and stuff like that. And the year that I got to uni, we had just won the British Uni Championships at football. We played at Morrow at Wolves Stadium, and it was a very, very good squad of guys at the time. And then there's limited spaces, and I just remember all of these games happening across like about 10 football pitches, and I remember seeing this sea of like lads, and I rocked up in my brand new football boots and like didn't know what was going on. Obviously didn't know anybody there. And I remember seeing the amount of people there and thinking, there's no way I'm getting in here. Like, and the standard was obviously really, really good. And if I hadn't have gone to that trial and tried out for that football team, my life now would have been completely different. Like that one decision. And it's really, really weird to think back and pinpoint that exact moment, but all of my friend circle would be different. I wouldn't have bumped into certain friends like Ben Sumbler, and
the reason how we know each other,
which is the reason why we know each other. I wouldn't have sort of met my partner Jez, because that link wouldn't have been there. My best friends would have been different. I would have probably have dropped out of uni very quickly, because university, when I arrived, it wasn't really for me. I never really enjoyed it. I had a plan for in my head, I had a plan for getting to university at all costs, and I didn't have a plan for when I arrived. I just, it was like...
So how did marine engineering go? That's the question.
Absolutely horrendous. Absolutely horrendously, because like I said, I mean, all the people, I think there was about 80 or 90 people, excuse me, people on the course. And I was fairly okay at maths at school, maths and physics and stuff. But what you learn about, especially with a university like Newcastle, is a very highly esteemed red brick university, and it's got, a really strong engineering school, world renowned naval architecture sort of like facility and stuff like that. It's obviously Newcastle, as is Glasgow, is a shipbuilding city, and it's always been known for its shipbuilding. And I think that's one of the things when I went for that open day. I remember the guy who I was talking to was one of the professors. He was just really impressed that I was from Glasgow, because it was a shipbuilding community, and I think that was one of the reasons why I got in, as well as my grades and stuff. And I very quickly realised that when I got there, everyone was... Well, there was no one who looked like me and who sounded like me, put it that way. There was no working class lads from the East End of Glasgow there, put it that way. They were all really, really experienced yachtsmen, or women, people from like who are islanders from like Greece or Japan. There was a lot of Japanese and Greek people there who had grown up around ships and boats and probably built boats in their spare time when they were at school and all the rest of it. I had never even set foot on a ferry at that point. I didn't know anything about anything, so there was no baseline of understanding.
Where is the boat connection? What made you think boats?
I wanted to do something different, and at the time, there was a race that came to Glasgow called the Tall Ships Race, and I remember my auntie took me, my mum's sister, and I was captivated by these boats. And I, for some reason, I'd convinced myself that I wanted to design America's Cup yachts. That was my original idea. I was thinking I'm going to design these yachts and stuff. I had no idea where it came from. My mum's dad was in the Navy, so my dad's dad was in the Navy as well. So, but I don't think it was anything to do with that, because I'd never grown up with stories or like anything, or like, you know, nothing. I don't. It was a completely random, left field decision, and it very quickly unravelled when I got there, because I thought it was going to be like an engineering degree with a little bit of maths, and what it ended up being was a maths degree with a little bit of engineering. I was doing 8 hours of maths lectures a day, pure maths, applied maths, engineering maths, all day, every day, and it was just destroying me. I remember my first ever lecture, I was like psyched up big time, because I'd made it to uni. I'd gotten out of Glasgow in the situation that I was in. I'd proven to myself that I could make mum proud, and got to uni, and you know, I was doing something with my life, and I just turned 18. Fresher week had just happened, and I'd started drinking for the first time. My first beer was on my 18th birthday, literally, believe it or not. And I just remember Saturday I was sitting in this lecture. It was an engineering maths lecture, 500 people in the lecture. I'm in there, massive cheesy grin in my face because of what was happening. It was like I was so pumped that it was like that I'd gotten to university. I had like pencil case laid out, brand new pencil, and like I was literally like buzzing for it. And what happened next? It just knocked me down to side instantly. And I don't know if I've ever told you this story before, but the lecturer was a guy called Dr. Appleby. Huge, big guy who looked a little bit like Frankenstein. And he was sort of like literally grey-green skin, a big scar across like one eye, scary looking guy. Quite a tall guy. And he was about 10 minutes late, I remember. And everyone was buzzing, and obviously it's the first lecture of your university career and stuff. It's like a landmark moment in many people's eyes. And like I said, I was just like so happy to be there, and I'd worked so hard to be there as well. I remember after him being 10 minutes late, the door is literally kicked open almost off its hinges, and everyone's sort of getting startled. And he threw all of his stuff down. He seemed pissed off, this guy. And I only found out later that he was kind of like more of a research professor, and he was only allowed to be a research professor if he'd done some teaching type scenario, and that was one of, I think, why he was generally angry at having to teach all of these little yuppies. And basically what happened is he kicked the door open, and he walked over to the blackboard. It was an old blackboard, and he wrote Dr. Appleby on the blackboard. And he sort of like, he turned round to the class and he said, my name's Dr. Appleby, and I will be teaching you engineering maths this semester. Take a good look at the person on your left. And then there was this big silence, and everyone's like, what's going on? Like, is this guy lost the plot or whatever? And he started getting agitated. He was like, go on, look at the person on your left. So everyone in this 500 person lecture theatre looks to the person on the left. And he's like, now take a good look at the person on your right. Go on. And everyone's like nobody knew what was going on. obviously take a good look at the person you're right. And then he pipes up and he's like, both of those people will fail engineering mathematics this semester. You don't know anything about maths. I do. Let's begin. And that was the start of the university career. And it never really got any better after that, to be honest. It was just like a total... What he was doing was he was saying, doesn't matter how smart you think you are.
Yeah.
And he was spot on as well, by the way. There's a lot of people in there with some big egos who have gotten some really good A-level results and all of that sort of stuff. But it really didn't matter because that was like the baseline. And I thought I was quite smart at high school, but I very quickly realised that I was a very small fish in a very, very big pond. And I just never enjoyed it. I used to wake up in the morning almost in tears that I had to go to university lectures, and I missed a ton of the lectures. Most of them in my first kind of like year or two. I was failing my exams all over the place. I remember going into one exam in my first year, and it was an open book exam. I had never been in an open book exam before. I thought open book, like whoever has the books is the one who's going to like get the best results type thing. So I remember going to they gave you a reading list of stuff that you could take into the exam. And I went to the library like as soon as it opened the first morning that we got this reading list, and I made sure that I got all of the like 20 odd books that were on this list. And I went into the exam with all of these books because I was thinking I'll just like, look up stuff and like or all the rest of it. I'd missed most of the lectures that for this subject as well because I hated it so much. When I went into the exam, I couldn't see anybody that I recognised from a course, even though I wouldn't know tons of people anyway because I had hardly used to go. And I remember looking, and a couple of the people that I did recognise, and I knew who were super smart people, they were only in there with a pencil and a rubber. And I thought, right, okay, what's going on here? I'm literally going in there carrying 20 odd books, like it's a mountain of books, and everyone laughing at me. And as soon as I opened the exam paper, I looked at the first question and I thought, what? The second question, nut. And there was only like 3 questions on it. It was a 3-hour exam, 3 questions. And I actually was so confused that I thought I was in the wrong exam. And I called the invigilator over and I said, excuse me, is this engineering maths 0250 or whatever? And she leant down and she whispered in my ear and she said, yeah. And I thought, oh my God, I literally can't even answer one question. And completely failed that course and that year, I think as well. I had to do loads of resits over the summer and managed to bumble my way through the second year. Got to the end of the second year. And what had happened is they changed the course or the requirements to become a chartered engineer the year that I got to university. And if you wanted to be a chartered engineer, which is, progress your career and earn more money and move up the ranks as an engineer or a naval architect or whatever, you had to have a master's, not just a bachelor's. And I remember going to the tutor and saying to him, like my course tutor at the time, and say, there's absolutely no way in hell that I'm going to get a master's here because I just hate it, and I don't even know if I'm going to scrape by with a bachelor's, like, to be honest. What are my career choices if I do graduate with a bachelor's? And I always remember him saying, well, you've got 2 options. You can become a design engineer at 25 grand a year for the rest of your life and that's it, or you can become a maths teacher. And I remember looking at him thinking, what? Like, someone had told me I was going to become a maths teacher when I was at school. That's how my life was going to end up. And I just thought, no way. And I had a chat with my dad and I was like, I need to change course. I went and talked to all different faculties. I got accepted for the law school and all, like, talked to different courses about going on and stuff. At one point, I was going to do law, and my dad was like, and I was just super chuffed I got accepted to do the law thing. My dad was like, "You've never wanted to be a lawyer. Like, why would you do that?" And I eventually just chose something that I was completely passionate about and that I'd always really enjoyed and gravitated towards because it was more of an interest, and that was computing, and that was IT. So I joined started from scratch again. So I was at uni for 5 years in the end. All my friends carried on with their final year, and I went back to square one. Which I wasn't really super bothered about at the time because it meant I had an extra 3 years playing for the football team. And we were doing well in the football team. So ended up playing as the first team captain at Newcastle Uni for 2 years. And that was the only thing that really kept me at uni, to be honest, was the lads, was the football. It was as close to like a professional setup as you could probably have had, in that we lived with each other. Big house of like 6-7 lads all next door to each other. We played football. Excuse me. We played football with each other. 2 games a week, sometimes 3 every single week. We trained twice a week as well. We travelled all the way up and down the country on a Wednesday and played against other universities, which was some great times. And then you go out on the Wednesday night afterwards, the sort of sports night, in Newcastle, and that was really the only thing that kept me from dropping out at uni, and as well I promised myself that I wanted to graduate with a degree, and I wanted to see it through. And I'd never really quit on anything in my life up until then. I still haven't, to be honest. So I managed to see it through to the end. But by that time, I had bundled my way through to the end of the course and done loads of resets. I dropped my honours in my degree, so I never actually graduated with a 2.2 or a 2.1 or anything like that. I graduated with an ordinary degree, which is the lowest class of. It's not even a third class honours. It's just an ordinary degree, and I never really explained that to my dad or my brothers about what that kind of meant. And when Colin and my dad came to my graduation ceremony with my Auntie Ellen, who's my mum's oldest sister, in 2005 now, they lined all of the people up in my class and they put me right at the front. And when the sort of ceremony was underway, I was the first one to have their name called out. Everyone else was in alphabetical order, and then it was me in a class of his own, literally at the front. And big hall full of families and stuff, and I was absolutely mortified because my family had all come down, and I was like the first person in my immediate family to graduate with a degree.
Yeah,
Dad never went to uni, and my mum hadn't been to uni. My brother Kevin had been to uni, but I never lived with Kevin and Steph, and it was always my brother Colin and my dad. And when my name was read out, and obviously I knew why I was in that class by myself, but I'd never told my family because I was absolutely mortified. And I remember them reading out Christopher Morrow, Bachelor of Science, Information Systems, ordinary degree. And I remember hearing the words ordinary degree and thinking, oh my God. And right at that moment, my whole family stood up and started screaming and cheering because I had my name read out. And we were the only family that screamed and started cheering. It was like I'd had doctorate, first class honours or whatever. And they were, but to them, it was just as just as good. And they
Yeah.
if they did understand, which I don't think they did at the time, gauging off their reaction, they never let on. And I wasn't about to come clean about it at the time, basically. So I remember getting the parchment and just being super happy that I'd made it and I'd managed to get through. But I was also a little bit gutted that I hadn't kind of knuckled down more. But like I said, I enjoyed school because of the classroom type learning environment, but I didn't take to university at all. Just wasn't me. The whole like learning by yourself and going into lectures and there's 500 people, and I was partying a lot, obviously, with the football team, and I was going out like 6 nights a week, most nights, and hungover.
I mean, university, it's an endurance, isn't it? I mean, you go to university because it opens doors further down the line. And my granddad sat me down when I was 10 years old and said, go to university. You'll be the first Leslie-Rowe in our family to go to university. Doesn't matter what you do. I don't care what you do. You shouldn't care what you do. Just get a degree. At some point in your life, it will help you.
Yeah.
And it has. It hasn't helped me in my career or anything like that. But actually, if I didn't have that degree, I actually wouldn't be in Australia. I wouldn't have been able to actually get a visa and come across.
That's
so
right.
I always think back and think, shit, I mean, it wasn't really that much of interest to me, but I really wanted to do so. I really wanted to be that person in my family to go to university, get my degree. And further down the line, it's helped me. It's where I am today because of that. So
yeah, that's it.
It's just a thing. It's a university is a life experience that you get through.
Yeah, and I totally agree with that, to be honest, because like the if I could go back and do it all again, I'd probably do it the exact same way. And the most valuable thing from my time at university is the people that I met there. It's the friends that I made. And it sounds cliche, but Jez, my missus, is always a bit dumbstruck because the people that I know that I call my best friends are all people from that football team, and they're all doctors and lawyers and accountants and people in really successful, smart guys, but ultimately they're the exact same type of personality as myself and into the same things. They would do anything for you. You ring them up. If I was to ring them up, they lived in London, and I'd ring them up now and say I'm in trouble, they would just drop everything and come. That's how close they are. So if I was to go back and do it all again, I would do it exactly the same way, because that network of friends is worth way more than the actual parchment degree, the degree parchment that I got at the end of it. And obviously the debt that you're saddled with, the student loan. And I mean, getting through university, me and my friend Paul O'Leary, one of the main reasons, the only reasons, apart from the fact that, I mean, we worked part-time 3 or 4 nights a week all the way through university just to pay our way, because we had a student loan. Student loan, I remember, was about £3,600 a year. And I remember my rent and, going into the second, from second to fifth year, was about £1,500. So, we had like £1,800 to last us the whole year, and food and like everything really. So we had to supplement that with part-time employment, but I had to work so much because my dad wasn't in a position to give me any money financially, and wasn't able to pay for my accommodation or anything. I had to do it all by myself. And the only way that we ended up doing it was by applying to, there was a fund at university called a hardship fund. And it was for the most destitute of students. And every quarter, excuse me, you had to write essentially like a story as to why you needed access to this hardship fund. And me and Paul had it down to fine art. A sort of sales pitch as to like why we needed the money, and I was giving him the whole soft story. I'm going to drop out and I'm trying to support myself with a part-time. It was all true, but you're sort of lamenting it, trying to trying to sort of grease the wheels to see what you end up with. And we would always get something, but some quarters you might get 200 quid, and a couple of times you would get like 1,500 quid. And you'd be like, "What? And this is just like a grant. It's not something that was a loan." And that supplemented everything that we were kind of, doing. And if it wasn't for that as well, I don't think I'd probably have gotten through it financially either, because it was really, really tough. And yeah, just by the end of it, I'd been at uni 5 years, been to every bar in Newcastle, not even every restaurant, because I couldn't never afford to eat in the restaurants, but so every bar and every pub and every club, times 10. It's a very small place. There's only 250,000 people that live in Newcastle.
Yeah.
When St James's Park's full on a Saturday, it's 50,000 people there. 1 in 5 people that live in Newcastle are in the stadium, basically, and there's only one football team there as well. So, so by the end, I was so unbelievably skint. It was, I was desperate. I was living on, I used to go and shop in Tesco's. The Tesco value 9p noodles. 9p back in the day. They're probably not a lot more expensive now. I used to just buy that and broccoli, basically, because I was so skint. By the end of the 5th year, I was beyond. I remember in my graduation ceremony, I got my suit from a charity shop. I think I borrowed the tie from one of the other lads. The shirt that I was wearing was from a charity shop. My shoes had holes in them. Obviously didn't tell my dad how skint I was, because I didn't want him to feel bad, because I knew he didn't have much money, and I didn't want him to have to feel as if he had to give me money or whatever. So I always felt like I had to support myself. And I remember after I graduated being so desperate for a job that I was even the last year I was so over uni. I just wanted to work and start earning money and have not be a student anymore, and be able to afford clothes and food and all the basics and stuff like that, and not have to duck my landlord from paying rent because I didn't have any money.
It's 4 or 5 years of scraping, isn't it? It gets tired. You're living to the bone.
Big time.
I'm struggling like hell at university. Really, you'd want to go out with your mates and you had 10 quid for the week left. You're like, how do I do this? How can I go out and have a good time?
I never remember being it affecting me. I'd always go out. And I always remember getting drunk and having a good time on £10.
Yeah, oh yeah, you could do it.
And you'd end up with a couple of quid coming home as well. You'd have to walk home probably and not get a taxi, but you'd be well suitably refreshed on £10 and still have money for a kebab on the way home probably. But yeah, by the end of it, I was so desperate that I ended up. I thought at the time I was going into recruitment agencies in Newcastle city centre, and I was applying for IT sales jobs because I wanted to stay in IT and use my degree, what basic degree it was, but my interest in IT was still very much there. And I remember going into these recruitment agencies and applying for IT sales positions because I thought I was very different to the people that were on my information systems course. A lot of them were programmers and, they were introverts and they wouldn't do to them, coding was like a lifestyle. And, I didn't even have a laptop at university. I couldn't afford one. And I remember the lecturer making jokes in Java and code, and certain parts of the audience would laugh, and I'd be like, "What's everyone laughing?" I'm sat there hungover, and yeah, I just never really thought that I could see myself as an IT person, or like as a developer as such. I wanted to do something related to what I thought was the business side of IT.
Yeah.
And I thought I'd be good at sales because I could talk the hind legs off a donkey type thing. And I remember going into these recruitment agencies and saying, hey, I'm interested in IT sales and I've got this degree in information systems and all the rest of it. And then I applied for a couple of IT sales jobs and got to like the final stages. And then I remember there was two recruitment agencies who were next door to each other on a street called Grey Street in Newcastle. And it's like a big, very well known like street. It's like a Georgian half moon shaped street with all these opulent buildings and stuff like that, and it leads down to from Newcastle Monument in the city centre down to the quayside where all the sort of bars and stuff like that are. And I went into there was two recruitment agencies. One was called Nigel Wright, and the other one was called NRG, which is Northern Recruitment Group. And I had an interview in Nigel Wright one day for an IT sales position. And I think it was an IT sales position at the time. And I went next door and to Northern Recruitment Group. And then on the ground floor, they had a kind of like all of the professional services recruiters like IT and legal and HR. And it was like a multidisciplinary recruitment agency, accountancy and finance and stuff like that. They were all upstairs, but they had like a branch on the street downstairs for just people to walk in and get like office jobs and admin and PA type level secretary jobs and stuff like that. And I went into the actual shop front like sort of recruitment bit that went on at the street. And I asked them for IT sales job, and I remember the person who interviewed me sort of sat me down and started talking to me about like what I'm into, and I talked to her about my degree and all the rest of it. And I'm sure her name was Leanne, if I remember correctly, and she said to me at the time, have you ever thought about being doing recruitment? Have you ever thought about doing IT recruitment? And I said, well, funnily enough, you should say that, because I was next door at Nigel Wright and I was talking to, and before I could even sort of get the words out of like Nigel Wright, she had taken it to mean that I was talking to them about an IT recruitment job. And she got sort of like super competitive at the fact that I'd been talking to Nigel Wright, because they were huge competitors, especially in the IT recruitment space with each other, or in every discipline really. She just said, just wait there a minute, I'm going to go and get someone from upstairs. And she ran upstairs and she got a girl called Morrow, and she came down and talked to me about an IT recruitment type job and NRG. And then I think I went back for a formal interview the next day. And again, they brought up the whole Nigel Wright thing. Oh, you've been talking to Nigel Wright and stuff like that. And I just sort of played along with it. And that worked out well, because they ended up making me an offer for a job in IT recruitment. And I bit their hand off, because I was just so desperate at the time for anything. And I think my starting salary, I went straight in as an IT recruitment consultant, not a resourcer or anything like that. My starting salary was like 13 grand. So I was like properly starting from the start. That's 2005. And then, literally started on, I think I started on a Friday, which I remember was weird. And where we used to all sit, they used to call it the library, because it was so quiet in there, which is weird for like a recruitment office. Normally it's buzzing. And you had like HR recruiters and legal recruiters. You had the exec search and accountancy and finance and IT. And it was only myself and my boss at the time, a guy called Rob Milsom, who's an absolute legend of a geezer. Just amazing. He's from down south in Surrey, and loved a bit, like ex-rugby player and stuff. Just loved a beer, and used to go out after work. He used to go out every weekday till like 2 a.m, go and sleep in his car, and then get up and just like walk in from the car park with his hair all over the shop, down a pint of water, and just crack on with his day. And I just never used to understand how you could do it. But yeah, there was only 2 of us who were in IT, and I in the IT recruitment team, basically. And that's how I remember my career in recruitment started, because I went in on I think the first day was a Friday, and the job section in Newcastle, and the Newcastle Chronicle, which is a newspaper there, the local newspaper, it's probably still the same now. They released the job section on a Thursday. And I remember on my first day, Rob gave me the job section and said, go and try and get some jobs on, type thing. And he just gave me the job section. Literally no training, like nothing. It was just like job section in the newspaper and a phone and me, and in this room full of probably 30 very experienced and older and a lot more affluent people who drove nice cars and wore nice suits. And I was in there with my charity shop suit and, borrowed tie and all the rest of it, holes in my shoes type thing. And I remember literally thinking, he's just testing me. Everyone's testing me. And I remember thinking everyone's listening in to what I'm saying. And then I started like cold calling these companies to try and get some business on, basically. And that was my introduction to,
I remember those days.
My career in recruitment, basically. That's how it all started, really.
Amazing. Absolutely amazing.
Yeah. Okay. So just to explain for everyone listening, this is now part 2 of Humans of Tech episode 1. We never actually set out to have a part 1 and a part 2. But what has actually happened here is that because we are complete and utter rookies in the podcasting game, we were recording our chat from the now called part 1, and we were talking for about 2 hours and 45 minutes, weren't we, Dill? And
before Dylan
realised, he said, it's not recording. So what's happened is we've basically lost 45 minutes of the story and some blistering conversation between the 2 of us. It was the best part, to be fair, which we'll never get back. So that was
It'll never be the same again, Chris.
This is it. I'm
not sure how you'll recreate this.
So now a whole weekend is past. It's Tuesday of the next week. I've had a shave and a haircut in between, so I look completely different. Dylan's in a different room.
My hair's just slightly longer.
So we're gonna carry on from hopefully where we left off in the previous conversation. So part 2 of episode 001 of Humans of Tech. Here we go. So
Chris, where were we? NRG.
So I had just started at NRG. That was my introduction to recruitment, and I stayed with NRG for about I think it was about close to 2 years. My boss, as I've probably mentioned in the previous part 1, boss, a guy called Rob Milsom, is an absolute legend of a guy. You loved a beer, ex-rugby player from Surrey. He would go out like every night of the week and stay out down the sort of the big market in the quayside in his suit, to have about 12 pints, and then he'd literally go and sleep in his car because he lived he lived about like 20 miles away. He'd go sleep in his car, and the managing director of NRG would walk in the car park in the back. It was like a secure car park, and always look in his back seat, and there he was. He was always sleeping in the back seat, but he was always a high performer.
You've all got a friend like that,
and like so he got away with it basically. And he used to come into the office. Everyone's obviously there, fresh as a daisy, and he'd come in with his tie around his head type thing, and like same suit he was wearing from last night, and he would just go to the water cooler, down a pint of water, and then give out a big burp, and then sit down and start doing his work again. And then he would do the same that night. He would just change his shirt and go to the dry cleaners and stuff. So he absolute legend. And then I stayed with him for just close to 2 years, as I mentioned. It was a great company to start off in recruitment with, but at the time, it's probably still the case now. I mean, it was started by a finance recruiter who didn't really understand IT and tech, and for that reason, she kept the IT recruitment team really small. So it was only me and Rob basically, for the majority of the time that I was there. And it never really grew, so there was limited kind of like opportunities there, and they would tend to grow the accountancy and finance recruitment team because that's what the owner knew and all the rest of it. So I wasn't actually looking to leave, and then I got approached by a slightly unsavoury individual who was known in the sort of like the Northeast as a bit of a liar, to be honest. And I never knew all of this at the time, but I was warned by my director at NRG about this guy, and he couldn't believe it that I was going to leave NRG and go and work for this guy. But what had turned my head at that time is this individual essentially offered to double my salary, and as someone who was sort of like just less than 2 years out of university and completely broke on 13 grand a year, I bet his hand.
How could you refuse?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So I think he offered me like 25 grand base or something like that. So it was like just shy of like literally doubling my salary. So I was like, what's the worst that could happen? I remember saying that to myself. What's the worst that could happen? And I remember phoning.
So what was the warnings that you had for the job?
Just
who warned you, and what were they?
Just that he was like that. The guy was an unsavoury character. He had a bad reputation as being a bit of a cowboy. He'd messed a few people over. He'd started this business. It was a startup recruitment business. And the warning signs were there, I remember, because the first two times I was due to meet him to talk about the role, he approached me on LinkedIn and kind of headhunted me, if you like. And obviously as a young guy with not that much experience, that felt good that someone was interested in talking to me and all that sort of stuff. And the first two times that he was supposed to meet me, I was there in this pub waiting for him, and he never showed up. Like I waited for him for an hour, and he never showed up. Yeah. Gave me all these excuses, and I thought I should have just like walked away there and just been like, nah. I gave him a third chance. He turned up in the third time, and we sort of like offered me the job after a few encounters, and I took it up basically. So, but funnily enough, in hindsight, it was actually one of the most valuable experiences that I've ever had in recruitment, and it taught me a lot of things that I've been able to then take through to other roles and other companies in my career, mainly what not to do and how not to act and how not to be a leader, how not to treat other people. This guy was a maniac, and I hope he's listening to this, to be honest. He was sort of like, what he would do is he had a couple of investors that were like kind of Dragon's Den type investors who owned other companies. They were sort of like, perpetual sort of serial investors and stuff. And what he used to do is we used to lie to them about how much we'd made in terms of sales in the recruitment firm. And then he used to take all that pressure. He used to walk around the office lying to them in everyone's earshot. And then I used to get off the phone to them and turn around to everyone and say, I've just stuck my neck out for you guys, you need to make X amount of money next month, or we'll have to make changes. It was like a proper toxic atmosphere. So all the staff are on edge.
Yeah.
And then I told you a couple of weeks ago that they had like one major KPI, if you want to call it that, which was to be on the phone for 4.5 hours a day, which for anyone who's worked in recruitment is a near impossible
Absolutely
task.
ridiculous.
Yeah, and what's supposed to be an 8-hour shift, you need to be on the phone call time wise, talking to people for 4.5 hours. And if you have,
you can't have valuable conversations for 4 hours solid.
No, I mean, you know what it's like.
People bring in the clock.
You're talking to a candidate
clock.
in depth, they might have 10, 15 minutes, and you think, multiply that by the amount of, it could run into like 50 conversations a day, and then you end up just making calls for the sake of it. One guy got fired, I remember, for phoning up the talking clock and just trying to run time up, and he got fired for that. And sometimes people were there until literally like 11:30 at night. Still there at 11:30 on a Thursday night trying to get their call time up because they were so scared. And just totally toxic environment. And if you weren't on the phone, he would sit at the back of everyone. So it was like a row of people, and he would be able to see everyone's screens. That's why he positioned it that way. He was sort of like that much into sort of micromanaging. He wanted to see what everyone's looking at on the internet and all that sort of stuff. And if you weren't on the phone, he would run up behind your chair, start screaming and swearing, even to females and stuff. And he would kick the chair. He would boot the chair, and you would go flying. You know what I mean? And it was like honestly the worst atmosphere ever. But it just, like I said, taught me so much. And in the end, I was fired from that. Position, and I remember at the time feeling I had never been fired from my job, and what he was doing is he was sort of increasing all of the pressure on me from an operations perspective. So I had to deal with the operations side of the business as well as sales, and it was like a really weird sort of mold of a role. You don't often fuse operations and sales and have a high target and still have to do all of the dealing with the IT engineers and the website people and all that sort of stuff, and training people up internally and all of that sort of stuff. So it was I was pulled.
It's companies like that give recruiters a bad name.
Definitely.
With such heavy targets, KPIs. Even the recruiters, they feel the pressure. They do stuff they wouldn't normally do. You can't manage your candidates. You can't manage your clients efficiently. You can't do your job properly because you just have this pressure.
Yeah, but this guy was just a known liar, and I'm going to tell you the funny story about his kind of downfall here. And basically, what happened was, he had fired me in a really dramatic fashion, told me to go and meet him in the Malmaison Hotel with one of the other manager people in the company. We'd built it up by that point. Let us go. And then he went back to the office, and everyone must have been like, are you kidding? Like, what have you? And he had a massive uproar in the staff because they'd let me go, and I had a really good relationship with people, and people knew that I was good at my job, and he was just obviously a maniac, this guy. And he had a big uproar in the staff. Some of them, I think, threatened to leave, and I had that little sort of peasants revolt type thing. And then he tried to offer me my job back when he knew what he'd done.
No.
Yeah, and by that point, I had already decided I want to go to Manchester. So he got his nose was really out of joint that I was saying no to coming back. And what happened was this was at the time when I wanted to move to Manchester, because in Newcastle there was NRG, there was the company that I was working with, and then there was Nigel Wright, who I'd talked to when I joined NRG, and then there was another recruitment company called Solutions Recruitment, and it was really regionalised back then in Newcastle. It was only you only recruit Newcastle roles or northeast based roles, so it was you don't really deal with anyone outside of that region type thing. And I wanted to kind of go somewhere else, and I tossed up between. I was debating about whether or not to go to London or Manchester, and then a very good friend, Sal, convinced me to to move to Manchester, and he was living in Ancoats in Manchester at the time.
Yeah,
And
best decision you ever made, my friend.
Yeah, that's it. It was actually, yeah. And I came down to Manchester, and I remember I drove down in my little Fiat Punto at the time. I just passed my driving test literally like weeks before, I remember. And I remember driving down to Manchester with my whole life in this car. But when I was interviewing there, I interviewed in 10, I had 10 interviews in 2 days. And it was like a
really?
whirlwind tour. Yeah. It's like 10 interviews, and ended up joining Elan, who are now called Experis. They're part of the Manpower Group, as you well know. And and then basically moved down, I think, to Manchester in 2008. And then a funny story linked back to this guy that I used to work with. On my first day in the job, literally on my first day, I remember I was actually, because I hadn't lived in Manchester before. I moved in with our friend Ben and his missus at the time, and in their sort of spare room. And I hadn't done the journey once in terms of like, because when I came down initially, I was driving, but on my first day, I was taking the tram from the city centre. I remember I was supposed to start at 9, and then there was a problem with the tram in this, you know what the tram used to be like all over the shop. And I was an hour late for my first day at Atlanta. And
great work.
And I remember being like, oh my God. And my new boss, Martin Newens, was just shaking his head at me when I walked in the door, basically, and everyone was like, "Hey," I felt like ridiculous. And then later on that morning, the guy that I used to work with, I'm not even going to say his name. This guy doesn't even deserve people to know his name. He's a complete numpty. And he actually called up Martin and told us a lie, a story, complete fabrication, saying that I had stolen equipment from the company, and that's why I was fired. And you imagine, my first day, the only time I'd really talked to my new boss was in my interview, and he was like, "Listen, just want to let you know, I've just had this guy on the phone, and he said that you've done this and this and this," and I was literally like, I was fuming and mortified at the same time, and I was like, "You what?"
Yeah.
And I just could not,
because it's your word against his word. I mean, it's someone you don't know, a new boss that doesn't know you.
But Martin is such a legend that he's sort of like, he sat me down, cooled me down, and he's like, "Look, it's fine. This only happens to the best people." And that was his sort of pragmatic reaction to that. You know what I mean? And if he was a different character, that could have gone really bad for me right there. And like, they don't want the hassle or whatever. But he just said that if you were, he said to me, I remember him saying, if you were no good, he would be like applauding you out the door. But he's so bitter that you've come here. He wanted to mess something up for you. And then to make that story even crazier, I just moved to Manchester, so I was due to give Ben and his missus at the time their first rent, basically. And I'd worked my garden leave notice. So like, for anyone who's not in recruitment who's listening, you sort of like, you work it at home and you're not allowed to interact with anyone at the company. Companies are normally scared that you're going to take their information or whatever on the database and stuff. And I was due my last salary from that company as soon as I got to Manchester, and it never arrived. So I was due to pay Ben rent that like 2 days after I got there. I couldn't because I had no money. And I had to explain to Ben very embarrassingly that I didn't have any money, and I was chasing this guy for the money, and he wasn't answering my calls. And I ended up calling the company accountant, and the company accountant said that this guy had told them that I had stolen equipment, and that I wasn't to get any money and stuff. So I was like, right, I'm desperate here. I need to get the money that I'm owed, or else, like, because I had to wait like a month to get paid from this new job and stuff
get
like
paid
that.
from the land. Yeah.
And what I did is I ended up calling up one of the investor guys who was the investor in that company, who was, funnily enough, he was in Manchester. And I basically said to him, look, if you pay me what I'm owed, I'll tell you exactly how your company's been run. And the guy actually wired me the money that I was owed from his personal account. And I told him everything that had gone on. And right at that moment, that's when the GFC had started, the global financial crisis. Lehman Brothers that day, or the day that he sort of got his comeuppance, if you like, had just gone into administration and liquidation, and there was news stories all over the world of Lehman Brothers employees carrying out their brown boxes, if you remember the images of them.
I remember,
and you're thinking, this investment bank's just gone under, what is going on here? And it was everywhere you could look. And this guy that I used to work for, he was always telling stories before this had happened, how Lehman Brothers were one of his biggest clients when he was in London, and he was, sort of like, whoa, what, mate? And what they did in the end, these two investors, they set him a trap, I suppose. They told him he needs to go away and work from home because the financial situation in the company wasn't good. And then they made him, they told him he needs to bring in business and do all of that sort of stuff. And on the day that Lehman Brothers had gone under, he told on a call with these two investors that he'd just won 15 exclusive jobs with Lehman Brothers. So they were literally like on the phone, looking at the news, thinking, is this guy for real? He obviously doesn't know anything about this. So he's lying again to them about all of this stuff. So they've said, look, we're going to put some more money in the company. We want some more shares. We'll put 10 grand in, whatever. So they gave him 10 grand, took on an extra couple of percentage in terms of the equity. So they now had majority ownership of the company, and they voted him out of his own company. And that's what happened in the end. So it was a really, obviously, very ruthless thing. And when I found out that, I thought, Christ, like,
karma's a bitch.
But yeah, I mean, the guy shafted people left, right, and centre, and that's how that situation ended up for him. And I think it happened a couple of times after that, where he sort of like, I used to see on his LinkedIn profile that he was like popped up somewhere and he would last like 2 minutes and, sort of like do people over, and then sort of like, he's just always chasing his tail.
Someone like that, it's always going to come back to them. It's always going to come back to them and bite them in the ass.
Big time. But yeah, that was my introduction to Manchester, basically. So it was a really rocky start to my sort of like time.
What a first day at work. I mean,
literally, my boss getting a phone call saying that I was a thief. And I was like, absolutely mortified. But, that was a great move for me, because in the GFC and the financial crisis, I was recruiting into central government clients initially for first couple of years. So it was like Cabinet Office and the Ministry of Justice and some of the security services. At the time, there was a sort of UK's equivalent of FBI, which was called the Serious Organised Crime Agency, which is now called something else. We've done a lot of work with them. So it was really interesting stuff. And and then worked with them for a while. But that was at the time that we met each other. So I met.
Yeah, so we met not long after you arrived initially, was it? 2008?
Yeah, it was 2008. It was must have been like a couple of days after maybe a week.
Yeah.
After.
I remember Ben just showing you around town, and that's where I met you, just at the bottom of Market Street.
Bottom of Market Street, where who's the stand now is. Basically, the last time I was in Manchester, anyway, it was.
Ben was my boss at work previously, just randomly. We got talking, and just bumped into him in the street, and you were there. I think you just been there a couple of days.
Yeah.
You just moved in with Ben
because you were going to Creamfields at the time. I remember, or you just got back from.
Creamfields. That's good. That's right. Yeah,
and you were like, sleeping in a tent and stuff. I remember something about that, and like, it was. I think
the friendship blossomed from there.
That was a moment, mate. Yeah. So, and then, I mean, obviously we used to go out together, and me, you, and Ben are obviously you know, especially at that time, we were like bang into our clubbing, and we'd go to Sankey's every weekend. Yeah, and you
it was a good few years.
yeah, you were DJing in there every weekend, and it was good times. No
You and a
responsibility.
little group in the front.
Yay! I was trying to pick all the tunes for you, and you were like elbowing me out of the way. And then,
but it wasn't for another 2 years until I actually started working with you.
No, that's right.
And it was actually in a club. I mean, I'd finished university. I was just working in a part-time retail job. I was at a crossroads in my life, thinking, what am I going to do with my life?
Yeah,
didn't even know what recruitment was really at the time. And I remember my missus running up to you in a nightclub at like 2 a.m. saying, have you got a job for Dylan? Dylan needs some work.
I remember pulling me off the dance floor, and she was like, I need a word. And I thought something bad had happened. And it was literally like the wee small hours of a Sunday morning. It was, and I was a bit worse for wear. And
she was like, again on Monday.
Yeah, she was like, Dylan needs a job. And I was like, right. This isn't the best time to be talking to me. I couldn't even string a sentence together at that point, I don't think. And I just said, yeah, get him to call me on Monday at like 8:30. And I didn't think you would, or even if she would tell you or whatever. And then sure enough, the phone went 8:30, and I managed to get you an interview at Elan at the time, and I wasn't allowed to be involved in the interview process, and it very nearly never happened, if you remember, because there was the feedback we think he's one of the people in the interview was like, I think he's too good. I don't think he'll stay with us for very long. And it was like, oh my god, head and hands moment. I'm thinking, what is happening?
I remember coming back from the interview thinking that went really well. Laura Farragher, who was my boss in the end, she was great. I really liked her. And I mean, just it was quite funny. I remember you ringing me up and saying, well, I mean, I had the feedback from then, and you were like, yeah, Dill, I think you've got it. But it was touch and go.
It was touch and go.
I was like, what?
Yeah, so then,
I mean, that's good feedback to get.
And then that was your obviously starting recruitment basically. And then around about that time I had just finished off a whole year-long project recruiting IT tech roles for the Ministry of Justice down at Petty France and like close to Westminster, like right down the road from the Houses of Parliament. And I was down there like 4 or 5 days a week for like a whole year. And I didn't have, I remember that year, it was 2010. I didn't have one day off that year. And then it got to, we finished the project late November, I think. And by this point, Ben had gone round the world with his missus, and who's now his wife. And they'd stopped in Sydney. Got a place in Bondi, total, like backpacker cliche. They stopped in Bondi and then didn't want to move. And they were there, living there at the time. And Ben was like, come over and like, we'll go, come for Christmas. And at the time I was like, I need a break. And, I was a single guy and stuff at the time. And I thought, right, let's just go for it. And everyone at the time was telling me how much I would love Australia when I got there. And, it's made for you and you'd love, the weather and the people and the food. I'm like really into my food and cooking and all of that stuff. And it's just like amazing. And when the way that my mind works with stuff like that is when enough people have told me the same hype, my mind kind of switches off to it. And I sort of convince myself that it can't be that good type thing, and I'll make my mind up for myself. So when I went over there, I wasn't expecting to fall in love with it immediately like I did. And went over for 6 weeks. I remember I went to Martin, my boss at Elan, and I literally put the plane tickets in front of him. I was like, I'm going to Australia for 6 weeks and you can't stop me type things. I've not had one day off. And I remember his face. And I literally went for an extended sort of 6 week break. And then when I was over there, I was like, oh my God, this place is unbelievable. And could see so many opportunities out there and like see myself living there. And I was like so dead set. I was absolutely devastated to get back on the plane. You know, when I came back from being on holiday there, and I came back with, I mean, I had a plan in my head. I was going to walk right up to Martin and hand my notice in as soon as I got back. And pretty much the day that I got back, like within an hour or so, I remember, I was approached by another manager in the business, Steph, who we know and love. And she approached me about this opportunity to run like the sort of contract recruitment side of Barclays Bank, which was a great opportunity for me to move into something like private sector and into banking. And it was working with like, you know, 7 or 8 different business units, including Barclays Capital, Barclays Wealth, and Barclays Corporate, and Barclaycard, and I thought this is too good an opportunity to kind of turn down. Yeah. So I thought at the time, I'm going to have to see this through. So I gave myself 2 years to work there. And I sort of stuck to it then. So moving on from there, it was about 2011 it was in 2011, September 2011, that I met my now wife-to-be, who we've got 3 beautiful daughters with. And she was, how that happened was that I was again clubbing in over in Leeds, and remember there used to be a night called the Faversham. Do you remember that, Dill?
Yeah.
It was like an outdoor sort of garden party type thing, summer garden party. Great event.
Yeah, great time there.
And I was on the dance floor, I think, with Ben. Oh no, it wasn't Ben because he would have been away. I was with I was Sal and Andrew Thomas, who you know, and he put a pair of funny sunglasses on me, which made women's sunglasses, which made my face look like a bee. And he put a photo on Facebook saying, "I would rather be BWE anywhere else than with this guy," or like whatever. I was trying to be funny, and he put it up. And Jez, my partner Jez, she saw this photo, and at the time, Facebook had changed the functionality of when you add a friend. So before, what it used to do is you used to say you used to click on add friend, and it would say a little pop-up box would say, "Are you sure? Yes or no?" And you'd say yes, then it would send. Round about that exact time, like within like weeks of them changing that part of the product, he put this photo up of me. She used to go to school with him, and they were at high school together, known each other for ages. They're both from Southport, and she's clicked on my profile and added a friend, but instead of it saying "Are you sure?" it's just gone whoosh and sent straight away, and she's gone, "Oh," you know, like freaked out. So when I got back from this night, I'm still drunk, and I clicked on to check my Facebook for whatever reason, and there was this friend request from this.
There she is, the love of your life, waiting for you.
Beautiful blonde woman, and I thought, wow, like this doesn't happen normally. and I when she told me the story about the Facebook friend request thing, I thought, oh, that old chestnut, you know. But then she made me pick a random person and say, like, send that woman a friend request, and it just went straight away, like gone. So it was actually true. So basically, I met my now partner and with, you know, my wife to be with 3 beautiful daughters. I met because she added me on Facebook as a friend by mistake. Basically,
so how did you manage to convert that to a date? That's the question.
It took me a while, to be honest. Like, it took me. Honestly, we swapped numbers in the end over Facebook, and then we said we'll have to meet up. And like, I was giving her all my worst chat up lines over Facebook, kind of like messenger. And we text each other, I remember, for about 3 months every single day, multiple times. Yeah. And we both had at the time, remember Blackberries, we used to BBM each other.
Yeah.
And yeah, we both had BlackBerry, and we used to BBM each other and all that sort of stuff. And I went away on holiday with another one of our friends, Bear, and his friends from Huddersfield, all to Ibiza. Again, another clubbing related story. And I remember being out in like Messenger, and everyone's sort of saying like, "What are you doing? Like, you're in Ibiza?" And I was really smitten with her, even though I'd never met her.
Yeah.
I knew everything about her over that 3-month period. I knew what her family was like, what she was, into, and I knew that she was a very creative person, and we had really good banter. And in the end, I think we were sort of texting each other, and at one point she wasn't responding to my text for like 2 weeks at a time, and it was just like, I thought, what's going on here? And I had to give her a bit of an ultimatum. I was like, look, we either like just leave it or we meet up. Like, it's like, let's sort it out. So we agreed to meet up in Manchester. She had just come out of a kind of like 10-year relationship, and she just wasn't really the right time and stuff like that for her. But remember, we met up in Duke's 92 in Manchester, and that was where our first date was.
Nice first date.
Yeah. And I remember
then you met me after.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. We met you after for cocktails and stuff. But when I walked into Duke's 92, I couldn't see it. Bear in mind, I'm going off of Facebook photos here. I didn't really know what she looked like and stuff. And who I thought was her, it was really busy in there, and she was stood at the bar, and I could only see her, from the back. And I remember thinking, wow, like, I hope that's her. She's stunning.
Oh, she's tall.
And she was super, she had heels on, and I'm only 5'7". And I remember this feeling of like, what if it's not her? What if she's sitting down looking at me, eyeing up this other female? And I just remember getting really paranoid. And she turned around and it was her, and it was pretty much love at first sight. To be honest, really strange feeling that I never thought I would experience. And I remember, we met you, and you were DJing later on that night in South. Another infamous.
I remember you canoodling on the dance floor.
Yeah, that's it. And
young lovers.
This is it. And then we had such a good time together. I remember that later on that night, I actually said to her, "Look, I really like you. But I just need to let you know before anything, sort of like happens, like, or we get into anything, that I'm going to Australia. I'm dead set on going to Australia. I'm going to move there. I'm going to get a job there and stuff." And her response to that was, "Cool, I'll come with you." And that was exactly.
And this is on your first date?
This is in the night of our first date. Because there was no really getting to know each other, because we already knew everything about each other from that 3 months of texting back and forward. And I was literally like gobsmacked that she said, "I'll come with you," and I was like, "Cool." And that's literally how it happened. And then I remember the next day, I went to football, and I remember I was still too drunk to get in the car and drive to football, so I got a taxi. And I remember in the taxi calling up my brother Colin and saying to him, like, "I've met this girl last night. I'm going to marry her." And he was like, whoa. I remember him saying, "Wee man,
hold your horses."
He was like, "Oh yeah, hold your horses. What are we doing here? Like, backtrack." He just thought I was like, going off in one. But I did genuinely feel like that. I was like, I've got this feeling that I'm going to be with her, and it was like crazy, really, at the time. It just felt right.
So how long after did you leave for Australia?
So it was exactly a year. So we met each other on the 30th of September, 2011. And then we left we arrived in Australia on the 18th of October, basically. So it's pretty much like a year, just over a year, but we'd never lived together in the same, under the same roof. But took a lot of balls, to be fair. In hindsight, we moved she'd never been to Australia, not even on holiday.
Yeah,
she just always wanted to.
So during that year leading up to Australia, so was she in Southport and you were in
She was living in
Manchester?
Southport at her mum and dad. She'd lived in London for 10 years.
Yeah.
She was living with her mum and dad. She used to drive over and see me, and I used to drive over and see her. And I'm sure people at the time were thinking, wow, they're just met each other. They've agreed to move to Australia together. Like her mum and dad must have been freaking out because she had just come out of a relationship where she was engaged and that didn't work out and all of the rest of it. So, but yeah, we went through with it, and yeah, ballsy move, but it was one of the best decisions we've ever made. So I got a job working for People Bank, who are like the biggest IT tech recruitment agency in Australia, and I got a job working in a team. It was run by a guy called Spencer Stirrett, another legend, who funnily
from Burston.
Who's a Glaswegian. I grew up in a place called Baileyton, and he was from Denniston, which is about 2 miles away in Glasgow. Unfortunately, he was a Rangers fan, and I'm a Celtic fan, so that was like instant kind of banter, camaraderie between us type thing, and a bit of rivalry, obviously. And moved over there October 2012 and stayed with that company for about, I think, 4.5 years. But we always used to joke, didn't we, when we were commuting to Milan? We always used to say, hey, you want to talk about Australia? And I always used to try and say to you, when I knew I was going to Australia, that I'll try and get you a job over there.
Yeah. And I was in a similar situation. I'd been in Manchester for like 8 years at the time. And me and my girlfriend at the time were just fed up of the rain every single day. And I'd been to Australia before, like probably 10 years before traveling, knew what it was like. And we was like, should we just do it? And I was like, Chris, as soon as you get to Oz, give me a call as soon as there's a job going, because I'll be there in a second. It's probably about 6 turnaround, I think.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, we used to joke about the bat phone going off in the middle of the night, didn't we? Like, I was just like, ring you, and then like you just bat phone and be like, right, lighting up next to you. Yeah, Dylan, pack your stuff. And funnily enough, I really always hoped that would be the case, but I never really truly felt that because obviously you don't know what's going to happen on the other side, but I was just kind of hoping that something would happen. I remember Spencer.
I mean, again, it was touch and go, wasn't it? I mean, I obviously had the interviews with Spencer, and I was made an offer, but then the company went into a recruitment freeze.
That was right.
For about 3 months. So I'm sat in Manchester with this offer. I can't tell my boss yet that I've got this offer in Australia because this might not work out.
Yeah.
And without that, I can't get the visa. Without that, I can't book my flight. So I'm just sat there. I was sat there for about 3 or 4 months just waiting for this offer to come through.
Yeah, I remember many a phone call with you. I was just trying to sort of like calm you down and be like, mate, everything will be fine.
You were like, it's still happening. It's still happening. I promise you, honestly, it's going to happen. I'm like, but is it?
Yeah. And that was difficult period. And then you have the whole visa situation to get through and like all of that sort of stuff. But yeah, you managed to get you across, and then we started working together, and obviously
again for another 4 years.
I know, that's it. Like, lucky you. And we sort of like sat in it. I mean, but that was a mad journey that we've been on together, because like obviously, you know, it started off just like socially and like on the dance floor and raving and all the rest of it, and then, you know, working together in Manchester and even like commuting in and out together, and then eventually getting a job together over in the complete opposite side of the world, which was phenomenal to share that with someone that like that you know so well and you're such good friends with. It was really an amazing experience to like have someone there that you know from back home to go through all of that with.
No, I mean, we couldn't have done the move without you. I mean, we stayed with you for 2 weeks or so while we looked for an apartment. I think I remember getting there and it just hammered it down for 2 weeks.
Do you remember arriving, and instead of putting stuff in shipping, you brought like 9 suitcases?
We had four huge suitcases each.
That was
8
great.
Suitcases. The taxi home cost us about $100.
That was more
from
than
the
that.
airport to your...
It was crazy. Because
I remember looking for flats for the first 2 weeks, and it was just absolutely hammering it down. And I was thinking, shit, what have we done? We've just come from Manchester where it rains every single day to this.
I remember the day that you arrived, actually. It was torrential rain. And I remember
torrential rain for 2 weeks.
You got back to ours at like 6 a.m, like Sydney time or whatever. And and it was literally
my girlfriend at the time. She'd never been to Australia before. Yeah. So I've sold the sun and everything. Green. And she's like, what the hell? It's freezing. Hammering it down.
But it came good. So that was a few days after that. I'm sure it was all right, wasn't it? But and then obviously, we sort of started working together. We built up the sort of digital practice at People Bank, which was kind of like a little, it's almost like a little startup within a bigger company, wasn't it? And we worked together for a good number of years there, and then you left after a while, and when I left recruitment.
I needed a year out or so, and my wife at the time, she needed help with the business, so I thought I'd take a year out, help her build a business, do the marketing side of things. Left Chris in the game for the first time, and probably we'd worked together for 6-7 years.
Didn't know what was going on. I was like, my right hand, like my partner in crime was just like gone, and I was flying
the morning said I can't sleep.
Yeah, flying solo all of a sudden. But I never thought you'd come back into recruitment after that. To be fair, after you stepped out and stuff, and I mean, what happened with me there is that we
stayed on for a bit.
I stayed on so I was with them for a total of, I think, about 4.5 years, and it was a fantastic experience. Amazing people, such professional recruiters with some amazing experience, like really some of the hardest working recruiters I think I've ever come across, and some of the hardest partying recruiters as well, who in the same vein, who love that side of it, especially in Sydney when the sun's always shining and stuff like that. That whole culture of it was quite a boozy culture, wasn't it, over there? And then
Friday afternoon.
That's right, and then got to, I think it was 2015 was when it all kind of changed for us in Australia. And what happened was we actually, my memory's a little hazy of which way around this is, but I think we actually got a phone call from Jez, my partner, used to talk to our mum and dad pretty much every day on FaceTime. And one time our dad, we had come back, I think, for a wedding shortly before that, probably about 6 months before that. This was in 2015, I think. Sort of summer of 2015. It's around about 2014, maybe around about the August time, I think. And I remember playing golf. He was with my father-in-law to be, Eric, and I remember being on his local golf course. He played at a course called Southport in Ainsdale. He used to play every week for 30 odd years. He was very well known in the area for being such a good golfer, like kind of scratch level golfer, really amazing. I remember playing golf with him, and he, in one of the particular shots, I remember he hit his shot and then immediately screamed out and held his back. And I thought that he pulled a muscle in his back. And he was really hobbling, and he was like, I've done something and it doesn't feel right. And he was pretty much almost in tears. And he stopped playing, and he just walked round with me for the rest of the game. And I was hitting the shots, and he was just walking round, holding his back the whole time. And then when we got back to Australia, he'd been sent for some tests by the doctor, and what sort of happened was that they sent away for some blood tests, and they found out that he had a very rare type of blood cancer called multiple myeloma. And what that had done is it attacks the sort of calcium in your bones, and it had led to 2 of his vertebrae effectively crumbling away, and really damaging his back. And that was the first sign of the disease, was when he was playing golf and he felt it in his back. That was essentially his vertebrae kind of starting to crumble away, as gruesome as it sounds. And I remember we were on FaceTime, and I could tell that my mother-in-law, to be Yvonne, was, not her usual self. I remember at the time she was quite upset, and they told us about Eric having this thing called myeloma. And we knew it was like a cancerous thing, but we didn't know anything really about how serious it was and anything. And yeah, it was a real heavy hit to take, to hear that someone who's so close to you was suffering so much. And then we sort of started to get bits of information come through to us over the following couple of weeks. And then we found out that, the average life expectancy for the disease was 2 years. And that was a massive thing for us. And we were like, wow, this is like, he just kind of turned 70 at this point. He just retired from his job not so long before. And it was just a devastating blow for the family to take. And with us being in Sydney, we felt so far away at that moment, really isolated. My partner was extremely upset, and we didn't know what to do and all the rest of it. And I think at the time we got engaged around about that time. I think it was shortly after we found out we got engaged. Yeah. It was on my missus' birthday. And I remember talking, and we sort of said, look, instead of us, because there's a 2-year life expectancy thing, which obviously we were hoping was going to be a lot longer, instead of waiting for us to save up enough money to get married and then have a baby, and with Jez is 3 years older than I am, so we decided to try for a baby first before getting married, and obviously with Eric's condition in mind. And we were blessed enough we literally started trying, and within, literally a couple of weeks, we found out we were pregnant. And I remember being at work, and it was a Monday morning, I remember, and I get a FaceTime video call from Jez, which she never does, obviously, especially it's a Monday morning. I'm just getting started my day, and we had, obviously, as you know, sales meetings in the morning on a Monday and all that sort of stuff. And I remember diving into a meeting room, and I answered the video call, and it wasn't her face; it was just a table, and on the table there was, like, I'm not kidding, there was probably about 10 or 11 or 12 pregnancy tests all laid out. Because she had gone back and got more tests to just triple check.
Yeah.
And it was all positive. And I remember my head fell off, and I just thought, oh my God, wow, this is really happening. And she was really excited, and we were all like, just, oh my God, amazing news. And then I had to go and sit at my desk for the rest of the day. Just with this news, obviously couldn't tell anybody, and I was literally just.
That's the hardest thing, isn't it? Right at the start, there, it's the time you want to tell them.
I'm just like sat there, just going, "Oh my God!" And obviously we told Jez's parents, and they were like super happy, and that really gave Eric a bit of a focus then on, like, to take his mind off what was happening, something to look forward to, and something that puts things in perspective, and all the rest of it. But then, we sort of prepared for parenthood as best we could. But at that time, it was really really difficult because we were so far away from home. We didn't have any support. Childcare was super expensive. We were on one wage because obviously Jen was like heavily pregnant and about to have a baby. I made some big choices straight away, and I quit. I was in the middle of preparing a pre-season football for our pre-season at football, I should say, and I had to quit the team because I didn't have a car at the time. We moved to the North Shore where Peoplebank were based, downsized away from our lovely sort of beachside residence in Coogee, and trying to save money and all the rest of it. And then we moved into literally like a one-bed shoebox, a 15-minute walk away from work so that I could maybe go home at lunchtime to check if everything was all right. And then Rosie arrived in 2015 in September. We thought she was going to arrive in your birthday, and she missed it by just a couple of hours. Your birthday's on the 19th of September, and she arrived on the 20th. It was a Sunday at like 4 a.m. and that was just an amazing experience. And from that moment, our lives changed forever, really. And we stayed in the end in Sydney for 2 years, and obviously in regular contact with Jez's mum and dad, and his condition kind of was worsening. And we made the decision when Rosie was 2 years old. It was a very, very difficult decision. Was to leave Sydney and move back to the UK. At the time, the type of personality that Jez's dad was, he wouldn't have reacted very well if he knew that we were moving back because of him. And leaving our life, and he knew how much we loved Sydney, and we built up a life there with a good network of friends, and my career was going really well, and we couldn't afford to buy a house, but that's pretty much par for the course in Sydney, isn't it? Like, it's one of those things. But a lot of aspects of our life were going really, really well, and we made that decision to literally like stop everything and start again, and to take Rosie away from her little friends that she'd made over there when Jez was going through mum's group and everything. It was super, super difficult. And but at the time, I remember we had to tell a lie to Eric to say that we're moving back from me to start a business. And somewhere along the lines, that lie became the truth, because it was something we just told over and over again. So to everyone else, like Jez's family and everything, and some of them knew the real reason and stuff, but a lot of the people back here, they just thought that I was coming back to start the business, when in fact the number one reason was we were coming back because Jez's dad was seriously ill, and we didn't want to be on the other side of the world and get a phone call that something had happened to them and then forever regret that you weren't there. Because when you boil it all down, as you well know, it almost feels like when something like that's happening to you, that you're trading good weather for family. When you boil it all down and you get right down to brass tacks, and it's a black and white situation, it felt like that for us at the time, and that's why we did it. So for anyone who's made that move it's not like moving to another city. When you move to another country, another continent, you have to give away most of the things that you've built up over that 5-year period of being in Sydney. All your furniture you have to sell, a lot of your belongings I got rid of, sold my golf clubs, gave my football boots, put some stuff in shipping, but the furniture that we'd accumulated wasn't going to fit in her mum and dad's house, because we were moving back to live with them temporarily before we sort of made the move to for ourselves and bought a house, hopefully, and everything like that. But it was a big question mark. I mean, what was going to happen? Because I had incorporated Digitalent in the August. I worked for 6 months briefly for a company called Scout as their kind of general manager, which wasn't going to kind of work out for various reasons anyway, even if I had stayed in Sydney. But again, it was a good experience, and I was thankful for it. And incorporated the company on my lunch break in Scout's office on Company's House in the UK. I decided already on the name, and I had already had experience of building a website and a WordPress blog and stuff, because I had my own blog as a sort of job search coach and interview coach and all the rest of it. And I incorporated the company on August the 1st, 2017. And then from August till we actually eventually left Sydney, which was on I think the 16th or the 17th of October. So we were actually in Sydney 5 years to the day. But we go back to the UK on the 18th of October, 2017, having left in 2012. Yeah, it's funny because when we were in the departure lounge in Heathrow and we were leaving, initially I remember calling my dad up, and the two of us basically crying down the phone to each other because we were thinking that we were, I don't know, it was like I was moving forever, and I was dead set that I was never coming back. And, you know, I remember hearing my dad kind of crying down the phone. I've told you before, he's not an emotional type guy. He's quite a strong sort of minimal emotions type, typical Glaswegian dad of that era. And I remember him crying, and anyway, here I was back in the UK, having to start again. I left all of my obviously clients and candidates back in Sydney. I built the website between the 1st of August when I incorporated the company, and when I got on the plane, which was in the October, the website was ready to go and the logo and all of that sort of stuff, but I hadn't physically done any work because I was too busy getting ready for the move. And obviously with a 2-year-old at the time, and we had a cat who we still have. We shipped back over from Sydney, who was more expensive than the 3 of our plane tickets put together.
Really?
Yeah, he was more. It was cost us more to bring him over than it did for the 3 of us. And like collectively, it was mental.
Yeah.
And then and then we got back. And then the situation we were in was that we were effectively moving in with, Jez's mum and dad, which was,
So how did that work?
We were just not prepared for how difficult it was going to be, because you're effectively moving in with an elderly couple who are in their 70s, one of which is very, very sick and who's, seriously ill with cancer. And we move in 2 adults, a baby, 2-year-old, and a cat. And with all of our, a full-on crazy family with their own ways of doing things, and our own little isms, and they've, very set in their ways in the way that they have run their house. And and it was a very difficult period of I remember, because we've got a set hierarchy in our family where obviously we're at the top, and then we look after Rosie, and, sort of we've got rules involved and stuff. And then when you move into a house where there's already a hierarchy that exists, in that Jez's mum and dad are at the top, and it's Jez who's, they're the parent-child dynamic. Then you throw another parent-child dynamic in over the top of that, and it's just very, very difficult. But we in order to get Digitalent started, that was one of the main things for us to be able to do it. Because if I had done that in Sydney, with how expensive it was over there, I would have had to have saved up probably for another 3 to 5 years on the wage that I was on, and how expensive it was for rent and all the rest of it. And obviously with a baby, with childcare and everything, I would have had to have saved up for a much longer period of time to be able to have the air cover to, sort of live without a wage for the first 6 to 12 months. So by moving back to the UK and in with the in-laws, and sacrificing effectively our whole life in Sydney, we were able to get the air cover to, not to minimise our expenses in a way that meant we could have a crack at starting this business.
That's the thing with recruitment. It's such a relationship driven role. If you leave a market or you leave a position, you're basically starting from scratch. You're building new relationships. It takes time, doesn't it? That's the thing.
Yeah, it takes a lot of time, a huge amount of time. Yeah. And if I think back to it, I hadn't done really any new business recruitment activities since I used to work for that guy that I mentioned who was unscrupulous in 2008. The rest of those roles were account management focused, and I wasn't going to, with my own little startup business, walk up to Barclays and say, "Hey, cool, I can just recruit loads of roles for Barclays because you're like that size," and obviously Barclays is Barclays Bank. So I remember we spent a week trying to get over the jet lag, and obviously with a 2-year-old that's very difficult because she was getting up, middle of the night for that week. I remember getting up at 1 a.m. every day and just like playtime. She was just like, "Yeah, feed me. Like, I want to run around." And I remember just thinking, "Oh my God, this is so difficult. Like, baby jet lag's a real thing, and it's hard." And then after a full week of that, it was on the 25th of October 2017. I literally opened my laptop for the first time and started doing any work on Digitalent. And at the time, there was all.
Did you have your own setup in the house? How did that work?
So basically, what had happened is Jez's mum and dad, Eric and Yvonne, knew that I was going to start this business. Eric had his own business, had run a graphic design firm in Liverpool for 30 odd years, and he knew what that was all about, and he was sort of like really enthusiastic obviously about me doing that and sort of setting something up for myself. And they knew that with Rosie being 2 years old, I needed somewhere that was away from the house because she wasn't old enough at that time to take proper instructions, and she was, just learning to talk, and she was very much still a kind of toddler. And in their house, it was all glass panel doors. So if you were in a room and she could see you from the other side of the glass, she would just bang on the glass, or she would walk in the room. And I remember for the first week of the business, I couldn't get internet outside, so they converted a little, what was basically a tool shed, it was 1.5 meters by 1.5 meters, in sort of diameter, very small.
Yeah.
They insulated it all inside for me, and sort of done it up and painted it, and it was like one of the best things that anyone's ever done for me, to be honest. And they gave me that space outside to be able to go out and work on the business, which was absolutely essential for me to sort of like have the peace and quiet that I needed to work. And I remember working for the first week in their conservatory, and Rosie could see into the conservatory when I was on the phone to people, and she would burst in at the wrong time and start shouting, and like I'm on the phone to potential clients and all this sort of stuff. So it was really stressful at the time. And I just remember opening my laptop on that first day and sort of staring at the screen and sort of thinking about the task that I was faced with and how much I was literally starting from scratch. Because as any recruiter will tell you who set up their own recruitment agency, normally the way that happens is that a recruiter who's working for another agency sets up their own company and then effectively takes their old clients with them and their old candidates, and it's a sort of more of a kind of seamless move. It's still got its difficulties, obviously, with things like non-compete clauses and all of that sort of stuff. So like the only thing that makes that difficult for a recruitment agency new owner is non-compete clauses. So obviously you have to sort of like maybe not deal with those people for 6 months or whatever. But I done it the hard way, and I'd left all my clients and candidates in Sydney. And when I opened up that laptop on the first day, I had no clients to work with, no candidates to call up who knew who I was, because the last couple of years that I was in the UK, I was working in a kind of client relationship management role, wasn't dealing with the candidates. I was just sort of like building relationships with hiring managers and managing the account overall and all the rest of it.
Quite confronting, really, isn't it?
What's that?
To actually sit there and think, quite confronting to think, shit.
Oh yeah, I mean, I had loads of moments of self-doubt where I was thinking, am I good enough to do this? And like, I knew that everyone was watching me. I mean, I was living with my in-laws, and every day that I would come in from the office outside, they would be asking me about how it was going, and obviously and I'd have to tell them how it was going. I felt the pressure big time. and at the time we had some savings, you know, to you know, for us to make the move, and a little bit of a buffer to get us through hopefully 6 months of the first 6 months of the business. And obviously we're not paying rent and things like that at the time, but we're paying for all of our other expenses like mobile phone and food and you know, childcare for Rosie and things like that. So we weren't totally like freewheeling it, if you know what I mean. We still had to pay our way. And what happened is I ended up sort of like, I mean, I was working. I became obsessed about making it a success. I became like a complete workaholic. I would work, and I'm not exaggerating when I say this, I would work 16, 17 hours a day, every day, 6 days a week. And made myself sick a couple of times because it was a garden office ultimately. And the door on the office was effectively like a shed door. It wasn't like an insulated, you know, like double glazing thing. It was, you know, I was out there a lot of the time. And when we moved back, it was the harshest winter in 10 years in the UK. Yeah. And what we'd done by making that journey is we missed out summer as a family. We went from spring straight into autumn, basically.
Yeah.
And it was crazy because we, when we got back for the first, literally like the first couple of months, 3-4 months that we were back, it was 2 degrees most of the time, between 2 and 4 degrees, and it was snowing. I was out in this office.
You forget about that type of cold, don't you? You forget about that type of cold when you're in Oz. You just don't get it, and it's bitter when you get back to it.
Cold, yeah. I was out there with, most days I had like jammy bottoms underneath my jeans. I had like 2 or 3 pairs of t-shirts, and I had gloves. I had a hat on. I could see my breath outside, like when I was in this office, and I made myself sick because I was working so hard to try and get it off the ground, to get the momentum going in the business. I had tonsillitis probably about 3 or 4 times in the first 6 months, and just really unwell. And and then I was lucky enough to do the first bit of business, the first deal in the company by, I think it was the 19th of December in 2017. So I'd done it quicker than I was expecting to do it. But obviously when you run your own business, as a recruiter, when you work for somebody, you're just used to doing the placement, and then you get commission when that person starts. You don't have to worry about chasing an invoice and all of that sort of stuff. But the person was going to be starting the first couple of weeks in January, I think it was. And then I remember being up in Newcastle on the day that it was, or the day after that invoice was due. And I was so happy that I'd done the placement, but I hadn't seen any of the money come through to the bank account. And I'd left Southport, gone through Liverpool, and it was like a 4-hour train journey or whatever up to Newcastle that day. I remember it snowing that day because I was walking around my old university campus with snow on the ground and all the rest of it. And by that point, we'd gone through pretty much all of our savings as a family at that point. And I remember it very crystal clear. I remember being in Newcastle and going to the cash point, and I saw this is our family bank balance. When I looked at the bank balance, and we had £250 bang on in the world, like as a family. That's all we had. That's what it come down to, which was enough for, you know, one and a bit, you know, sort of big shop we call it, you know, like a family shop and stuff. And I remember looking at the cash point and being so far away in Newcastle and thinking, oh my God, like what happens if this invoice isn't paid, and really, like worrying about it. And I remember it clearly because I went to Tesco Express because I was starving at this point. I needed something to eat. And I bought a cheese and tomato sandwich from Tesco because it was like £1 or £1.50. And it was the least expensive thing there. And I thought if I just buy that, it was funny that was happening to me in Newcastle, because that was like what my student life was like for like 5 years, no money and stuff. And there I was back in Newcastle with no money. But this time I had a family that needed me, and they needed money, and you've got responsibilities, you need to provide for your family. So I remember phoning up the managing director of the marketing agency that I'd done this placement with, great guy called David, and I remember pretty much begging him for to play for this fee type thing, and I then phoned his accountant and I was begging that guy. I was sort of like, I needed that to be paid. It was either later on that night or the day after when I got back finally to Southport. I checked my bank balance and the money had gone in there, and that was like a watershed moment in my life when I first saw that. I literally said out loud to myself, "Oh, it works! It works!" People will buy my recruitment experience, my recruitment services from me, and the business has got a chance, because if I can do it once, I can replicate it. I can do it again, and it was like a eureka moment, and I was just nothing really could compare to that feeling the first time. It wasn't a huge fee or anything like that. It was just the fact that it actually worked, and that I convinced myself that I could do this. I'm a confident person, and I've always been confident in terms of like my own ability, but this was a different type of pressure. This was a different type of feeling, and a lot of eyes on me, and it was like it was a real sink or swim moment. There was no plan B. It wasn't like, if this doesn't work, X, Y, Z. We were living in Southport at the time. There's no tech recruitment agencies based in Southport that I could go and work for. I had to have commuted to Manchester an hour and a half or an hour and 3/4 each way, which with a young family would have been a nightmare. And so in my head, it had to work. It was like, because of that I worked so hard to make it actually happen. Because there was no safety in it. And I think that was one of the main factors in actually being able to get it off the ground in some way. And it was just that moment. I remember that £250 in the bank balance sort of flashing at me, and I was thinking, this is almost over, if I hadn't started. And there's I remember I've seen an interview from Jeff Bezos, and he said that when you start a business, you need to be cool with the fact that the likelihood is you're not going to succeed and that you'll fail. And then he said that, the likelihood is as well, when people say that the planets have to align for your startup business to succeed, he then went on to say, well, actually, it's actually more like real, like whole solar systems that need to align. To sit and you look back on certain things and certain moments, say, if that never happened, this would never have happened, or we would never have led on to this. We would never have had this customer or that employee. And there's now so many. We're into our 4th year, as you know, in Digitalent, and things are going really well. And then there's lots of different moments that I look back on and think, if that hadn't, and that was one of them, if that client hadn't have paid that first invoice, or if it had been a budget client and they went missing, that we wouldn't have had any money, the business would have stopped before it had started, really. And I would have had to get a job somewhere, and the rest of it. And then I kept working then. And the reason why I'm saying that is because another moment was about to happen. Probably 9 months into the business, and you were over.
I was just about to say, I think I the next moment.
Yeah, that's it. You are the next moment. Yeah, for sure. And yeah, you'd come over and you come to visit us in Southport, to say
Yeah. I mean, I hadn't seen you for probably, well, since you've been back. So what was that, a year or so?
it was 9 months. It was.
It'd been 9 months. Okay.
Yeah, it was 9 months.
Yeah.
Basically, yeah.
I was back because my wife and I had split up.
That's right.
And I wanted to come back to the UK just to see the family for a bit. And I came to see you, and you're like, right, what's your plans?
We went for lunch, didn't we? We went for lunch, and I was super excited. I told the missus that I was going to literally like pitch this idea to like be you coming on board with the business, and she remember her like wishing me luck and stuff as we were leaving the house, kind of behind your back. She was going like, "Good luck," and I was like, I was like, but I had what I was going to say all prepped in my head, and I was sort of like, we went to a pub around the corner for like a lunch. And we obviously, sort of chatted through stuff, and at the time you were at a real crossroads in your life, and you didn't know what was going to be. Obviously, you had spent that couple of years out of recruitment, and I think at the time you had a couple of potential job offers at places like Spotify and all of these cool places. Yeah. And at the time, obviously, Digitalent was, I was a one-man band and no proper brand really, definitely not in Australia. And it was, I suppose you just didn't. Yeah, I remember.
I think for me at the time, I'd never thought about getting back into recruitment, and it just wasn't on my mind. I mean, me and my partner, we'd split up. I was at a point where I'd come back from Sydney. I was actually unsure where I was actually going to live because my wife at the time stayed in Sydney. I was thinking, well, I can't be back there and see her every weekend, even though it was amicable split up and we were still friends. It was fine. The last thing is you want to see your ex every bloody weekend with your group of friends. So I was thinking, do I move back to England? Do I move to Melbourne? Do I move to somewhere completely different? What job do I do? Is recruitment even possible? And it hadn't even kind of crossed my mind until you actually kind of put it to me there.
Yeah, but I remember your reaction was lukewarm at best. you were sort of like, yeah. I remember that sort of that you saying that word. You went, yeah. You sort of like looked down and was like, yeah, I'm not sure. And you weren't sold on it at all. And I remember I was putting on a brave face when we were meeting, but I was completely dejected because I thought that was my chance to convince you, and I could see the possibilities of us joining forces again, and you building a company from Australia, and me doing UK, and
that's the thing. We spoke about that for years. I mean, obviously we've been working together for so long, and obviously I took time out of recruitment, and the only way I would have come back into recruitment would have been to start my own thing and to work alongside you.
Yeah.
But I just wasn't prepared for that question from you. And starting a whole business in Australia, you being in England, me being Australian, doing it by myself. I mean,
it's not like the business was mature and you were joining a business that was already sort of like a load of momentum.
It was starting
from scratch, and you obviously recruitment for a few years and stuff like that.
Yeah. So I was out of the game.
I remember Des saying to me, "So how did it go? Like when you had left and stuff." And I was like, he's not going for it. And she was just like, "What? Are you sure?" She couldn't believe it because she just thought she just expected you to be like, "Yes, great idea," and all the rest of it. And I was just totally flat. I remember for a couple of days, and like I said, dejected. Didn't think anything was going to happen. And then there was a client that I was sort of like on a call with at the time, and they were setting up an office in Sydney. It was a software company, and I was trying to, sort of get in there and sort of like do some business with this company. They're a fairly decent sized software kind of consulting firm. And I was on this video call with someone who was setting up the Sydney office. I was giving her loads and loads of good advice on the Sydney market and how to hire software developers there, good skills to hire and skills that are really hard to hire and all, just really good stuff. And obviously hoping at some point she was going to give me a crack, because in my head at that time I was like thinking I know the market well enough there that I could recruit those roles from the UK. And obviously at that stage in the business, I'm trying to pick up any type of client to keep that momentum going, to get more clients on board. And by that point I'd probably only done, I'd only really worked with maybe like 4 or 5 clients, and I had done a handful of placements. It was still very, very early days. I could have failed very easily. And I remember at the end of the call, this woman, I spent probably 45 minutes talking to her, and at the end of the call, she said, and I always remember the way she said it, she said, so is it just yourself in the business then, Chris? And I remember being put really on the spot, and obviously we had just met each other a couple of days before, and I said, well, actually, and I was still hoping, you hadn't given me a flat out no at that point, so I was still hoping against hope, being an eternal optimist that I am, that something might happen. So it just came out of my mouth, and I just said, well, no, actually, I've got a business partner called Dylan. He's based in Sydney. And she went, oh, he's based in Sydney? Well, we'd love to meet him. And I remember thinking, oh, I was thinking, oh my God, right. I was like, yeah, great. He's in the UK at the moment, but we'll get that sorted. He'll be back in, next week or 2 weeks' time or whatever. And she was like, yeah, great. And then I was like, I went into panic mode straight after that call ended. And I was thinking, oh my God, she's going to look Dylan up and he's not going to be part of our company on LinkedIn. And it's like, I was like, so I rang you up straight away, as you know. And I was like, Dill, I was like, you're going to have to do me a favor. You need to go to me. And you were literally like laughing hard down the phone. And I was like, you need to do us a favor. I told you the situation. You were just laughing. You're like, yeah, look, I'll go to the meeting for you. And obviously, luckily, we had that relationship. And, I was thinking, I trust you, with my life and especially with regards to like business. And I knew how good you were on like a meeting and stuff. And for me, it was a big opportunity for that company. So I was thinking like Dylan can go and kind of masquerade as part of the company and like all the rest of it. But I said to you, remember at the end of that call, I was like, you need to do me a favor though. She's going to check out your LinkedIn profile. So you have to update your LinkedIn profile and put down that you're working at Digitalent. And you're like, yeah, I will do. And then what happened then?
Straight after. And literally, I remember waking up the next morning and having probably about 35 messages from old clients, from old candidates. Oh, great to see you back in the game. We've missed you, blah, blah, blah. I'm thinking, right, this is it.
Yeah. I think that was the thing that kind of tipped you over the edge and you thought, there's some legs in this. Like,
at that point, I was thinking, I could probably do this. And it actually became serious.
Yeah.
And it was actually quite a good feeling to just see all my old clients and candidates that I kind of worked with over the years kind of actually come straight back to me and say, look, great to see you back in. Let's touch base. So, I mean, I got back to Sydney and I had about 30 meetings set up just with candidates.
That's right.
It was a good feeling. Yeah.
I remember an email from you and I'd, set you up with, I think it's before all of that, just before all of that happened. And I'd set you up with an email address and like all that sort of stuff. If you remember, I remember you emailing me back saying this escalated quickly. 1 minute we were sat in a pub and you were like, "Nah, I'm not so sure." Next minute you've got an email address. You're on the way to a client meeting. It's like a
managing partner of Australia.
This is it. Yeah. But thank goodness for that, because that was a major moment. That if that hadn't happened, you would never have come on board in the business, and the Australian side of our business would never have flourished in the way that it has. So it was just like, very thankful that completely random stroke of luck.
Always meant to be.
Yeah.
I mean, we spoke about it for so many years, and it was always meant to happen.
Yeah,
So.
I truly believe that. And then obviously from there we've continued to build the business for the last couple of years. We found out that that we were pregnant again as a family.
I was back in England at the same time again.
That's right, yeah.
I remember the call. Well.
And we had my partner Jez was sort of like going to be 40, just turning 40 when the baby arrived, and we thought it was just baby singular. And we paid for something called a harmony test, which is a sort of, you pay extra and privately to do sort of lots of these tests, due to Jezzy's age, and make sure there was nothing wrong, there was no birth defects and everything. The baby was healthy, and it was like an early detection thing that you pay for. I remember being super busy that day when I went with her to the hospital. I thought I was just going to offer some moral support, and I thought it was just a blood test, to be honest. Then we get to the maternity part of the hospital, and I was working from my phone furiously that morning. I think I had stuff going on with some potential clients and everything. And I remember the nurse who was doing the ultrasound being super bubbly and charismatic and dead friendly and sort of dead smiley when we went in there. And she sort of came to get us at the reception and said, "Oh, I'll take you through for the scan." And I was literally my phone in my hand, and I was like, "Scan? Oh, wow." I never knew it was I didn't think you could scan that early, because I think we were only like 6 weeks or something like that. We were 6 weeks pregnant or something like that at the time. And we went through to this ultrasound, and we were chatting away to this nurse. And I remember distinctly her face changed. And Jez is lying down looking at the ceiling, so she can't see her face. I'm working from my phone, and I'm looking across the room, and I can see this woman look petrified. Her face was sort of like just staring into space blankly. She'd gone grey. And I was thinking, I sort of clocked it out the side of my eyes, and I thought, no, you're just making that up. Everything's going to be fine. I was sort of like really worrying to see her like that. And she went super quiet to the point where, when there's an atmosphere in the room, you can feel it. It's this sort of cut the atmosphere with a knife type thing. And Jez said to the nurse in the end, after like a minute silence, and when you're sat there for a minute and there's this atmosphere, it's a long time to just be sat there. And I remember Jez saying, "Is everything okay?" Because she was making us feel quite uncomfortable. "Is everything okay? Can you see a heartbeat?" And I remember the nurse saying, "Yeah, everything's fine. I'm just taking some measurements. I'll show you what I'm looking at in a second." And I remember Jez, again, very clearly, like, it will go down in history as this moment where she said, "Well, you can see a heartbeat as long as you can't see two." And me and Jez sort of turned to each other and went, "Oh, can you imagine 2 babies? Oh, God." And the nurse, without missing a beat, turned the screen round and she said, "Yep, there's 2 babies." And I was like, what? Like, my head and my brain exploded and just splattered against the wall. And I don't think I've recovered in terms of shock since. So we found out we're having twins. And I'm just sat there thinking, it's finding out when as a bloke, you never think that will happen to you. It's not something that you ever think, "Oh, imagine if it happens to me." You just write it off, you dismiss it. I used to take the piss out of people that I used to find out, like blokes that I find out were going to be twin dads, and I think, "Oh, poor bugger," because it's going to be like ridiculous. Everyone knows how ridiculously difficult that is in terms of like the work rate and all the rest of it. And I literally could not believe it. I remember leaving the hospital, and we pulled over the car. We phoned Eric and Yvonne, and we told them, and they were getting into the car, I remember at the time, and we showed them the photo with the two babies and stuff, and it took them a while to understand what was happening. And then when they found out, the 2 of them were just like like over the moon.
Did you find out the sex then, or was that later on?
No, we never found out the sex then, because you can't, because the babies were too small at the time. But the part of the harmony test was that you could do an extra test, which for some specific, very niche birth defect, which I forget the name of now. But to do that, they test the chromosomes. And when you test the chromosomes, you find out if it's a boy or a girl, basically. So they give you the option of testing for this specific birth defect. And we thought, yeah, fine, let's do it. We kept Rosie a surprise, which was the best surprise in the world. And we thought, for this purpose, we'll find out. And then it took about 10 days to get that result back, by which point I was sat at my laptop again. And I remember Jez ringing me up. And the phone went, I picked up the phone, and she was just laughing down the phone. And I was like, what's going on? And she was like, I've just got off the phone to the nurse. And I was like, whoa, what's going on? And it clicked in my head, because I just assumed I'm from a family of 4 boys. Like I've got 3 older brothers, and I just assumed that wasn't hoping for a boy at all. I just want the babies to be healthy. But I just assumed that at least one of them, if it was twins, would be a boy. I just could not see that it would be girls. And then I realised that when my missus was laughing so hard that it was 2 girls. So all of a sudden I've got 3 daughters out of nowhere. And again, I just went into this deep shock. Like I could not believe it. Like I couldn't believe it for weeks and weeks. I was just like, oh my God. And and then between then, obviously we had that set off a series of sort of chain of events in our life, where we're at the time we were still living with Yvonne and Eric. And obviously when you find out you're about to have twins in a matter of months, that expedites the process of looking for a new house. And we hadn't found anything at that time. And then you're thinking and we need a bigger car, and we need 2 cots, and we need a double buggy, and all of this stuff going through my head. So I was really like, oh my God, this is huge. And then that set off just the house hunting process, and we hunted for a house. We must have viewed in the end, I think probably about 50 properties before deciding. In the end, we ended up. I remember Jez was heavily pregnant at this point. She must have been seven months pregnant. She was big because she's obviously having twins. And we went to see this house, which ended up being a complete. You would have had to have knocked the house down and started it again type thing. There was a toilet, as in a place to do a number 2, and that's it, in the corner of this living room, just off the living room. There was a door. And then it was the living room, and then the toilet was right on the edge of the living room, and it was just a shambles. And I remember Jez being really emotional and hormonal at the time. She just broke down in front of this estate agent, and she was like, "What are we going to do?" And this woman just was obviously looking at Jez, and she knew our story about coming back from Australia, and Eric had cancer, and it was just a really tricky situation to be in. And obviously living with the in-laws and stuff. And this woman, bless her, took pity on us, really. And she said, well, there was a place come up, and we've not put it on the website yet, but it's really nice. I took photos of it, and we'll see if we can show you around. And I was thinking, oh, here we go. At that moment, I just had no faith in that we were going to find anywhere, because everywhere was just no good. And for the prices that people were asking, or you'd need to redecorate everything, or knock down walls, or build extensions, or whatever. And part of my criteria was that I needed an office space, or somewhere that could convert into an office, which is where I'm talking to you from now, which used to be an old kind of garage, which we converted into an office in the end. And we went away totally dejected again, because this was at 11 o'clock in the morning. They said, right, we've got you this booked in for this house viewing at 2 o'clock. So I went away and no faith in this going to be any good. And we went to see this house, and just kind of as soon as you step inside, you just get that feeling. I was like, oh, this is nice. And I remember Jez staring at me all the way around. She was looking at me as if giving me the eyes were burning into my soul to say, I want this house. And I could feel it. And in the end, I had to put the woman on the spot, because at this point, there would be nobody else who'd viewed the property. And I said, look, I like the house. I know that my missus likes the house. I'm sorry to put you on the spot, but is there if we could reach a figure that you're happy with, would you be able to agree not to show anyone else the house? Because it's not like that as in Australia, where there's auctions on the street and everything, sort of like people bidding wars that happen and stuff. It's very much like you go and view a house, put in an offer, and it's yours. It's a much more simple process and stuff. And the woman was like, don't ask me what the figure would be, because my husband's not here and I'd need to speak to him and all the rest of it. And in the end, we drove, keen as mustard, the missus, and our mum was there as well, I remember. We drove straight from there to the estate agents, which I thought was a bad move, because it was showing us as too keen. Put in an offer, it got rejected, and then we put in another offer and it got accepted. So then we're thinking, this is awesome. Like, we've got the house.
Yeah.
We had a couple of weeks to decorate it. And then once we moved in I think it was on the 1st of June. 1st of June, basically 2019, which was last year. And the twins arrived on the 17th of July. So we had literally like 6 weeks,
crazy.
Before they arrived, basically, to decorate and get everything all ready. And then obviously you're straight into like twin parenting then. And it's like, another massive challenge. Sleepless nights. My missus was breastfeeding, and I didn't realise at the time that I would be helping her to do breastfeeding at night time. So for 6 months, every night between like 3:30 and 4:30, or 2:30 and 3:30 in the morning, I'd be up for an hour, because it's a 2-person job when you've got twins. You've got to, like, one person's got to.
How do you do with Digitalent?
I just went into like resilient mode again. I just went hardcore, like self-discipline, just get through it. But I'll be honest with you, I mean, there was times after 4 or 5 months where I'm sleep deprived, because I've been getting up during the night. I've been going to like work at like, getting up at, going back to sleep at 4:30 in the morning, getting up at 7 when Rosie gets up, broken sleep, minimal sleep all night, and then getting up and starting work for Digitalent at 8 o'clock in the morning. Obviously now got the Australian side of the business. We're doing like, sort of like work on that side of the, things as well. Late night phone calls, everything. Was lots of plates spinning. And there's times where the only time I've ever been really worried about my mental health was probably 4 or 5 months into the twins being born. And I came down here a couple of times, I'll be honest with you, and I sat in this room, in this chair, in the dark, and I just cried, because I was so exhausted. I didn't see. I just needed rest at that point. It was sheer exhaustion and sleep deprivation, and I was really, really worried about myself. About like my mental health. I was thinking like, that I was sick and all of this sort of stuff. And luckily, probably maybe about 6 weeks after that happened, I just tried to. I mean, I wasn't working out at the time because you're too tired. I was eating, not the best food. Just trying to sleep when I can. But the business was obviously massively high priority for us at the time. It still is. And you couldn't drop the ball on that. So that was the number one thing. And now we had a house with a mortgage to pay for and like twins to feed. And it was like I needed to just keep going, keep showing up, keep being self-disciplined and enough for my family, really. And it was after about 6 weeks of the twins sort of like getting up with them to help Jez in the night, they were eventually managed to get them to sleep through the night the first time. And that was like a game changer. But just before that, sadly, Eric Jez's dad took a real sort of, turn for the worse, and his health rapidly went downhill shortly after the twins were born. So he did meet them, and he came round and he saw the new house, but he was very frail at that point. He'd lost a lot of weight. He'd gone down to something like 7 stone at one point, very, very frail and aged, lost a lot of, his looks, and he'd become shorter because he's short vertebrae. He was suffering really, really badly. And he unfortunately passed away in November of last year. And that was horrendous. The sort of the pain that we kind of like went through with that. But then I suppose our decision to leave Sydney and come and spend time with Jez's parents at that point was vindicated, because at least Jez had that time, although it was a completely crazy time in our life with starting a new business and moving back from Australia. We had that time where at least we were together, and
so important.
Yeah, so important. And it was just very difficult. I mean, the day that he passed away, we were obviously breastfeeding still the twins, and I remember being in the room waiting for Jez's brother to come up from London, and he was on a ventilator. He was in a intensive care, and like sort of everyone holding his hand and talking to him, and he was unconscious. And I just remember this image of Jez was still breastfeeding the twins at that point, and she was pumping milk in the room, in the corner of the room, to try and get milk so that she could send the milk out of the room, away from the hospital, back to her cousin and her auntie who were looking after the baby, so that they could breastfeed. And it was that image of like, nothing stops. Nothing stops. You have death in one room and life in the same room. And it was a really confronting image to be like, there's a man there on his deathbed, but his daughter is pumping breast milk to feed his granddaughters who have just been born. And it was a really like, it'll always stay with me, that image. So you'd be like, nothing stops. Like, you just life goes on. And shortly after Nick, who's Jez's brother, and Heather, Nick's wife and Jez's sister-in-law, they turned up, and it was a matter of hours after that he sadly passed away, and we were all in the room with him. And then again, that's just a huge thing for Jez to deal with, and as a family, it really hit us hard, really hard. Now, obviously, Jez's mum's on her own, and she's just kind of moved around the corner from us only last week, basically, to sort of be closer to us. She lives about half a mile away from us now. And on the business front, we've obviously built it up at Digitalent now. So there's 8 of us now. We've got 1 person starting in January. There's 2 people who work for us part time overseas, but we've built it up to a solid company now with a good, strong foundation, and a platform that we can really build on to sort of take things into the future. As of today, Rosie's 5 years old. She's at primary school round the corner, literally a couple of 100 yards away from where we live, and she absolutely loves it. The twins are
5 years, God.
July, August, September, October. So, 17 months old now. Both of them, they're running around. They're into everything. Darcy and Millie, their names are. So we've got Rosie, Darcy, and Millie, and things are looking great. But it's been a whirlwind,
hasn't it? A whirlwind life, and obviously a whirlwind last year with COVID and everything happening like that. And we've weathered the storm. I think for us, it's so important, wasn't it, to kind of keep the team together?
Definitely,
and it's been challenges for everyone and ourselves. So onwards and upwards, 2021.
This is it, and we're leaving. I suppose we round it off there in the COVID note. In the last couple of weeks, myself, Jez, and our 3 girls have all been struck down with COVID, and that's been the latest challenge, basically. I feeling fine now, but the only thing is I've lost my taste and my sense of smell, and it's been gone now for like 3.5 weeks, and there's nothing. Rosie's been fine. She was. I think it started off with. We got an email from Rosie's school to say that, hey, the teachers contracted COVID, tested positive. You need to come and collect Rosie straight away. And then I think she's been asymptomatic, so she's sort of carried the disease but not shown any symptoms. Brought it into the house, and the twins have gotten unwell. Not like an adult would. Their symptoms are very mild, like runny nose and crying through the night and stuff for a couple of days. And then Jess started to get really unwell. But when you've got twins and a 5-year-old and you're in lockdown with no help because their mum couldn't come round, then you just have to get through it. It's not one adult, one parent can't go and lie down for a whole week in a room and they push soup under the door for you and stuff like that. It's not real life. You just have to crack on through it. And make it, do the best you can. So that's what we did, and I was the last one to get it. So I've made a full recovery now, apart from the taste and smell, essentially. So, but I think that's a good place to round up. That takes us up to kind of present day. That's a solid.
I mean, what a great story.
Yeah.
What a great life. I mean, you've learned so much.
I've obviously sat down and talked to someone about my kind of life story, especially not for like 4 hours. I don't think anyone would sit down and listen to me for that period of time in a normal, if it wasn't a podcast. But that's where we're up to.
It was interesting. It was interesting for me to hear.
Yeah, because
a lot of it I kind of No, but I knew certain milestones throughout that, but a lot of it not in the detail that you've spoken about. So it was quite interesting to hear your life and how you've navigated it and got through it and where you are today, mate. You've done a good job.
This is still standing, still going,
still here.
Got just a few scars to sort of to tell the tale. But thank you everyone for listening. That was the first ever episode of Humans of Tech. So thank you all for listening, and we will see you all again soon.
Thanks very much.